The meeting to order. I know we have a full agenda this evening. This is the Parks and Recreation and Open Space Commission for September. And the first item on the agenda is an approval of our July 11th minutes. Have commissioners had a chance? And I will mention we do have a couple of people that will be joining us shortly following some events in the schools. Do we have any motions?
I motion that we approve the minute.
Second?
I second.
All in favor?
And one abstention.
And actually, one abstention since you weren't here. Perfect.
I think it's 2. Yeah.
Oh, 2. So is that enough to approve the minutes? Yeah, okay, great. And then the next item on the agenda is staff and commission announcements.
Actually, we're going to, public comment.
It's open, excuse me, I know, sorry. It's open public comment. So if you have a public comment, and I know some in the audience do, for items that are not on the agenda, this is a chance for you to come up. For tonight's meeting, because we have a lot of people wanting to make public comments, we're actually going to be, for the later comments, we are going to be asking that they be 2 minutes instead of 3 minutes. But for these open public comments that are not related to things that have a lot of feedback, we'll go ahead and recognize you for 3 minutes.
Thank you.
Welcome, Susan.
Thanks. I'm Susan Schwartz, the head of Friends of Five Creeks. We're a 24-year-old all-volunteer group working, among other things, on Codornices Creek. And this is rather good news. There are a few surviving trout in Codornices Creek. We worked with the California Department of Fish and Wildlife for a day and a half, found 6 small trout. Old enough to have been in the creek before the April 3rd discharge that we thought might have killed them all. That is enough for hope, not confidence, for recovery. There's also been another discharge of foam, not as serious, not from the fire department, so things are still pretty fragile. But we have hope. The maintenance fund, the forgotten $450,000, is being used very well by Albany. Our thanks to Margot Cunningham and the nonprofit Rubicon to work on the neglected vegetation. I feel that we can finally use our volunteers strategically and over the years get a great deal done. UC Berkeley is doing better on the trash. Camping is more or less under control. Albany, thank you very much, is integrating Codornices into its yearly round of parks maintenance. And we look forward to having a planting day early next year. And what all of this really means is that I feel that we can begin thinking about a positive use for what should be a marvelous urban treasure, particularly getting Albany's school children to Albany and Albany Hills, Cerrito Creek, and the Bulb to learn about nature. For a 1 square mile city, as you know, you have wonderful natural areas, and your children can all reach them by foot. We really look forward, I hope, to having a creek walk with Harriet on 4 p.m. September 20th. I don't mind, you should issue the invitation, but I hope lots of you will come along. There are real possibilities. I think really doing something may be a year off, but it's time to begin now. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Do we have any other public comments this evening about items that are not on the agenda? If you do, you are welcome to come up to the podium and to make a comment for 3 minutes.
Well, I'm with the community garden.
Yes, oh yeah, please. Oh, lovely, thank you. They come bearing gifts.
These are special kinds of peppers that taste like chili, but they're not hot.
Wonderful, thank you.
My name is Judith Heller. I'm with the community garden. And it was wonderful to meet, with the subcommittee in July. This is the first I've seen this, though, the results. And so, I'm glad to see this. And so I will, read it. I guess what I would like to say about the community garden, a lot of us want to say a few things, and we are here to support the community garden. And I would like to there's a strip beside the garden.
And I don't want to interrupt except for to say that we're actually going to have comments about that agenda item a little later in the meeting.
That's fine. That's fine. I
Are
just
you able
wanna-
to, yeah. Are you able to stay and, because then we'll be able to ask questions
Yes,
and, okay, great,
Yes,
wonderful.
I will stay, yeah.
Okay.
And so I'm just hoping for some support from the city, to clean that area out, to prune the apple trees that were planted, by the city. So that's all I have to say.
Wonderful, thank you so much, and we'll look forward to hearing from you later in the time as well. Thank you. Any other comments about, not the community garden, not the pickleball or any of those items that are on the agenda, but just other items that are not currently on the agenda? Otherwise, we'll have you with the agenda item a little later in the meeting. Is it about the community garden? It's not about. Okay, wonderful. Okay, great. A miniature pumpkin, how appropriate for fall. Thank you.
So, good evening. My name is Maya, and I'm a property owner in Albany, and I've lived here for almost 16 years. I'm also a member of the Ocean View Community Garden and believe deeply in the power of green communities. When we met, some of us met with some of you in July, I learned that the plan to build bocce ball courts next to the redwoods at Ocean View Park was coming along. As someone who lives in Albany, I thought I'd go around and talk to some people about it. And no one seemed to know anything about this idea. However, many people expressed their dismay when they heard about it. And I really liked what this one person said. They said, why do you want to take away the one little patch of natural green we have in Albany next to the redwoods? Our kids enjoy playing there. The city of Albany has recently also come up with a climate action committee, and there's talk of a climate action plan. That is a brilliant idea. However, turning green spaces into non-green spaces in a hyper-urbanized place does not align with a climate action plan. Building bocce ball courts would involve eliminating green spaces. We already have 2 ballparks, one near Ocean View and one near Cougar Field. We have Cougar Field itself. We have numerous tennis courts. Now there's talk of turning some of them into pickleball courts. We have the aquatic center and several school campuses with big playgrounds that are accessible to all after school hours and on weekends, and many more. How many more sports facilities does a town of 20,000 people need? And most of them are not used to capacity. So we're going to build more by removing green spaces. I think that we should be doing our part to keep the city green. And so I urge the committee to abandon the idea of building bocce ball courts, instead create more greenery in Albany, plant more trees, create more gardens, put up living walls everywhere. Why don't we make Albany the city with the most per capita living walls in the country? Why not think of turning rooftops into green spaces? And if you really want to do something with that green space next to the community garden and the redwoods, why not turn it into a meditation garden? Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Do we have any other people in the public that would like to make a comment about an item not currently on the agenda? Thank you, Brian. Okay. With that, we will move on to the next item on our agenda, which is announcements from staff and commission members. And I'll start with you, Shelley, and commissioners can add other announcements.
Thank you. I have a few announcements for you this evening. Music in the Park has started. We do this Wednesday nights in September, and so we have 2 concerts left next Wednesday and the following Wednesday. I hope you can join that 6:30 at Memorial Park. I'm going to save that announcement about the redwood tree work that's taken place for when John's up here by me. We have some nice pictures of that work. Friends of Albany Parks update. We've had a couple of cleanups since we last met. We had an Only Greenway project or cleanup on July 27th, and we had about 20 volunteers that day. They filled up 7 bags of compost and weeds removed, and they also weeded and watered and wood chipped, mulched about 46 of those fruit and nut trees that were planted. They work with the California Rare Fruit Growers. That's our partner on that fruit and nut tree grove in the Greenway. And then in August, we had a Peggy Thompson Pierce Street Park cleanup, and they had 11 participants that day, and they took out 6 full compost bags of weeds and then cleaned up the playground area. Our next Friends of Albany Parks cleanup event will be on September 28th at 9 a.m. at Terrace Park, so you guys can make it to that. And finally, we call the month of September, Claire likes when I say this, it's Rectember. And so at the end of September 20th through the 28th is Albany Local Week, where we challenge residents to do everything in Albany for a week, and we have a scorecard, and we put on or partner with to put on 14 events in that 8-day period. So look for that information in the activity guide or on the city's website. And I also wanted to acknowledge and thank Commissioner Voorhees Cooper for his service while he was on the commission. He is not on the commission any longer, but we do have a new commissioner that I would like to introduce, is Kirsten Negas, and I'm just going to let her say a couple words and tell us about herself.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Kirsten Negas. I'm a landscape architect and I'm licensed in the state of California, and I'm an Albany resident. And I've been working in the field of landscape architecture for quite a while. I've worked primarily on public projects and corporate campuses and parks, and so I know I've worked a lot with planting trees, picking the right tree, looking at plants, urban greening. I'm very passionate about using native plants in urban settings and also looking for opportunities to provide habitat for wildlife species in urban cities. So I look forward to serving on the council.
Wonderful. Welcome. Do we have any other announcements from commissioners?
I just wanted to mention that Best of Albany is currently going on. This is the 3rd year. I think the Chamber of Commerce has put on the Best of Albany. There's 35 categories folks have submitted nominations for. So right now you can go and vote for your favorite business person or organization. There are actually some individuals nominated for like organization positions, so that's great. But just go to everythingalbany.com, and there's a link right on the front, and you can vote. And then we'll announce the winners at a gala event during Local Week. Thank you.
Wonderful. I do want to just reiterate what Susan shared. Some of you may remember that she invited commissioners to come and see the creek with her on a tour. So I did set up a time on Friday, September 20th at 4 p.m. It is actually going to be posted, or has been posted as a public meeting, or will be posted as a public meeting in case a number of commissioners are able to join at the same time. And we'll be meeting at San Pablo, the creek at San Pablo, and we can send additional details. But that will also be online if others in the public want to join. Just an opportunity for her to take us through the creek area and share the work that she's doing and has done, and areas of concern as we contemplate stream maintenance and a number of other kind of open space issues moving ahead. Any other announcements from people on the commission? Okay. So we will then move on to our first presentation, which will be from Claire Griffing, the Sustainability and Resilience Manager with the city, who's going to talk with us about the waterfront planning. And we're welcoming you and glad to have you here.
Great, thanks. Good evening. Just for some context, I'm going to give you an overview of the history of the waterfront and what we're working on now. And to avoid confusion, even though our waterfront is classified as open space, it's really a project that the council has taken on directly, and they have a subcommittee on waterfront issues. So not necessarily looking for direction from you, just kind of giving you an update and overview on what's happening at the waterfront, and happy to answer any questions you have. For some context for everybody, the property ownership is a little confusing when you go out there. You don't necessarily know whose land you're on. The city of Albany owns the sort of like orange piece here on this slide, the Albany neck, the Buchanan right-of-way, that portion of the neck, so not the full neck, and then the majority of the bulb. The waterfront in Albany is about 190 acres, and 88 acres of that is publicly owned. So the neck is, Albany's portion of the neck is about 7 acres, and then the bulb itself is about 31 acres. Much of the waterfront was created gradually from 1963 to 1983 by a landfill operation that placed construction debris progressively further out into the bay. The beach actually is a recent development generated by the interplay of tidal action and the contour of the landfill, so sort of naturally formed from unnatural materials. Starting in the 60s, the citizens' efforts to stop garbage dumping in the bay and to regulate development along the shoreline were finally successful in closing the Albany landfill in 1984. And the Regional Water Quality Control Board worked with the city and the community members to achieve the requirements of the landfill closure order, meaning it's an uncapped landfill. That's the order from the Water Board, and it's open as a community park. And it's really grown, nature has sort of grown out of the fill of the landfill. In 2002, state parks adopted the general plan for McLaughlin East Shore State Park, which includes the Albany waterfront and bulb in their general plan, and it's also included in the state park general plan. The plan outlines the area intended to be maintained and utilized as open space for conservation as well as passive recreation. And the city-owned portion of the waterfront is designated to be incorporated into East Shore State Park to be managed by the East Bay Regional Park District. That has not yet happened for a variety of reasons, primarily because of concerns with uneven ground and protruding metal, as well as a history of unauthorized camping on the site. Currently, there is no unauthorized camping on the site, and it's patrolled regularly by our police department. But in 2013, the City Council requested that the police department begin enforcing the city's no camping policy on the bulb. And during that transition, the city provided temporary homeless shelters and also contracted with Berkeley Food and Housing Project to provide social services to those camping on the bulb, including employment assistance and housing placement. Just to jump right into the future of the bulb, we're going to I'll just give you a little bit of sea level rise. This is kind of part of my role here is educating people on what might happen. And we're not super concerned about sea level rise at the bulb. This is projections for 3 feet of sea level rise. And as you can see, there's a portion by the freeway, this green area here on the map, that would be inundated regularly from sea level rise, starting in potentially as early as 2050. The sea level rise projections are all over the map right now, and they're continuing to change and get scarier and scarier. But this is what the science says now. And for a 100-year storm, we're looking at more potential inundation of our waterfront areas. The bulb and neck are above 30 feet, and so we're not so concerned about that area, but we're certainly concerned about, since it's a landfill, the revetments around the shoreline and certain areas that are potentially subject to erosion. So that's something we're paying attention to. In 2015, the city prepared a study outlining improvements to the bulb to aid the transition process to the East Bay Regional Park District. And this process included extensive community engagement. The one big thing we heard from everyone is, we love it the way it is, don't change it. So we suggested some very minimal changes, some improvements to trails primarily, and then really focusing on shoreline improvements to make sure that the landfill has long-term suitability for sea level rise. So so we didn't recommend much because people really love it the way it is. The big things that we focused on in the plan itself were hazards. We didn't find any chemical hazards when they did an assessment on the bulb, but certainly there is still some rebar near trails, things like that. Coastal vulnerability, habitat and wildlife, so it has some habitat enhancement recommendations are in the plan, as well as access and recreation. People wanted to be able to ride bikes out there, have bike racks, et cetera, some vista points. So that's the plan. And I'm kind of jumping around here, I apologize. In terms of what's been happening on the waterfront since then, it's really been some initiatives that are initiatives by East Bay Regional Park District. So anyone who spends time at the waterfront has noticed over the past few years some major improvements. The south side of the neck was their phase 1 of their beach project, which was a shoreline revetment and improvements and widening of the trail, et cetera. Just recently, they redid the beach project, adding dunes. They added facilities like a restroom, which was really exciting, as well as some educational signage. And they've fenced off some dunes for habitat restoration. And then what they're still working on is both some added parking, a parking lot there by the beach, and then that extension of the Bay Trail so people don't have to ride their bikes through the Golden Gate Fields parking lot. So that's still in process, but pretty far along in the process. So if you haven't been out there since the beach has been redone, I recommend it. Lots of happy people out there. And a little bit about the current projects we're working on. So I mentioned the transition study that we worked on. We're really focused right now on recommendations in that plan that focus on immediate safety hazards and habitat enhancement. So hence the photos of safety hazards. So we're looking at site safety and hazard mitigation, removing protruding rebar and other potential hazards near publicly accessible trails, and addressing minor erosion concerns, creating and implementing a vegetation management plan that aligns with both public safety and habitat enhancement and user goals, managing all those needs, and removing invasives and protecting native plants. And then addressing some areas of shoreline erosion as well, which could be a bigger project. So that's it. That's the history of the bulb and the Albany waterfront, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Do you know what the timeline is for the Bay Trail, as someone who rides through the Golden Gate Fields parking lot frequently? Do you know the timeline for that Bay Trail opening?
I
Or
wish I did. I don't. I'm sorry, but I can get back to you on that. I can ask the Park District. Yeah.
I think the posted date has always been, I think, December of this year. I don't know if they're on track, but that's what it's been posted.
any other commissioners have questions?
Who's developing the vegetation management plan?
I don't know the answer to that either. We haven't gotten that far in the process. I imagine it would be a partnership with the Community Development Department, the Public Works Department, and perhaps your department? Could be. We haven't talked about it yet.
And I had a question about the funding source for removing all the rebar and that kind of thing. I take my dog out there frequently, and I know of at least one other dog owner that said their dog got sliced wide open by rebar and had to have major surgery a few years ago.
So what is your question?
Funding source and who's doing that, managing that?
We have some general fund monies designated for some of these high priority projects at the bulb. We haven't initiated a contract yet with someone, but we do have funding for that project.
And can you go back to your first map?
Yeah.
I was curious partly why things are colored way out into the water and what that means.
Yeah, so the state of California owns the tidelands, and there was a grant in 1919 of, I think it's almost 400 acres of tidelands to the city of Albany. And so we have rights to those tidelands, and then we made them, we put a park on there. We filled it up. But I think the reason that the property lines go out into the bay is because the state owns those pieces. And any work that we do out there, or development that we do out there, is subject to the State Lands Commission's approval.
You mean like if we wanted to build a ferry dock or something, or some big...
Right.
Any other questions, Todd?
You didn't mention the artwork in your presentation for the plans. Is the plan just to kind of leave things the way they are, unless they're hazardous, or?
Yeah, the transition study does mention the artwork. We had a stakeholder meeting that spoke about the artwork in depth. The plan has a couple of ideas. One being, we heard from the community that the high-profile sculptures out there are things that people really like to see, and so there was a conversation about preserving those, perhaps with sea level rise, because many of them are on the north side where they might be inundated, perhaps moving them to another place on the bulb. This is long-term project. And also potentially partnering with a nonprofit to work on enhancing art out there. But we did no real concrete steps for how to manage that.
That's a pun, right? Concrete. There's a lot of concrete out there.
There is.
And is that Love the Bulb? Is that who you're working with in terms of a nonprofit, or
We haven't
just a
initiated.
nonprofit?
It's just in the
undefined?
plan. Yeah, we haven't initiated anything at this point.
Any other questions for Claire?
And just to clarify, the transition study was to look at what kind of work should be done and then have a negotiation process with the park district. So it's still not clear exactly who might be responsible for which of those items, but the city has taken on the responsibility for those immediate hazardous items.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your presentation. Look forward to hearing more updates as
Public comment, maybe on.
Yeah. So do we have any members of the public that would like to comment on the presentation about the waterfront? Okay. So we're going to move on to, thank you, Claire, and then we'll have we'll have John join us because we're going to move on to the street tree removal application. And the first item is at 1259 Brighton Street at the Albany Middle School. Did you want to skip to that part first?
It's a removal of a Bradford pear tree at the Albany Middle School that was requested by the Albany Unified School District. The reason they're requesting it, they're retrofitting an ADA parking space there. This is the tree. Right now, there is ADA parking, but there's been some changes with the crosswalk there. There's the existing crosswalk, and the tree is the first one in the next to that car. There's they're going to expand the ADA parking to a 41-foot space, and right now where the red curb is, there are these I don't know what they are. They protect the crosswalk. These raised bumps that were installed. So that's part of the reason for changing the configuration. So that's the tree. It's basically a healthy tree. Here's a, you can see where those newly installed bumps are. Actually, that's not the tree. That's the tree that will remain. Let me go back. So this is the tree. It's a healthy tree, but I question the people that are working on this, and they At first, it sounded like maybe they could move it, but they told me they couldn't because of ADA regulations, how the ADA parking has to be configured. So this tree will remain, and the tree behind it is the one that's to be taken out. Currently, there's 2 dead trees there, so I talked to them about what we're going to lose a tree planting area. So there's 2 dead trees that should be taken out and replanted. So this is the first tree on the block, and then there's another tree just before the crosswalk that are both dead, and they would be required to take these out and replant new trees there. An alternative is on the Spokane side of the property. There might be a place to establish 1 or 2 trees there also. And that's really all I have on this.
Thank you, John. Do we have any clarifying questions from commissioners?
We don't really have an option here. If we say no,
I hoped we did have an option, but it seems like
Yeah.
we don't.
yeah, okay. Fair enough.
And this is probably part of the much bigger project of the new construction across the street and kids crossing, and has to do with that as well.
So yeah, the crosswalks have been reconfigured. I think this goes with that.
Do we have any public comments about this tree removal application from the middle school? And is there any discussion from commission or motions?
I would motion to approve.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Everyone in favor?
Aye.
All right, that passes. Thank you very much. And then the next item on the agenda is the dead tree removal report that John also has for us.
Okay, yeah, I did a survey of trees. I noticed several dead trees, so I surveyed all the streets of Albany, and I found 19 trees that need to be removed and replanted, and I just wanted to run these by you just so you're aware when we're out there and we're cutting these things down, and we'll be replanting in the winter also, all of these sites. So there's 955 Castro. We have a red bud, and I noticed a lot of red buds dying, and I'm trying to discourage people from planting red buds when they want a new street tree. They're sensitive trees, and they tend to grow out shrubby, and people walk down the street and kind of break the branch that's in their face, and the whole branch dies back. And, so this is the one large tree, I think. Most of them are smaller trees. This is a camphor at 512 Curtis. 1036 Curtis, there's another red bud. 1120 Curtis is a red bud. On the median and Key Route, there are 2 trident maples that have died recently. I'm not really sure what's going on there. There's some scarring on the bottom from mowing or weed whacking around the trees, so I've talked to the maintenance people about this. So they're right next to each other. They're opposite 836 and 840 Key Route. There's Australian willow at 1131, which is another tree that seems to not be doing very well in the city. There are a lot. They seem to stand for a long time, but they're not in good shape. 955 Ordway, another trident maple. 1006 Ordway, a hawthorn tree that just, according to the owner, just kind of suddenly died. It flowered out really early this year, and then all the leaves turned brown on it. 555 Pierce, across from the apartment buildings, is a live oak, one of the only live oak on the block there, and apparently that's gone too. So we'll probably replant that with another live oak, just see how that goes. 712 Pomona actually is down already. Somebody hit it with their car. It was decayed. It's been dead for 6, 7, 8 years, I think. So,
There you go.
that's taken care of. 1244 Portland, another red bud that recently died. I was there when there were a few leaves left on it, but today there's no leaves. It's a week or a couple weeks ago there were no leaves left on it. 1467 Portland, another trident maple. They have a row of maples there, and they all look kind of sad. I'm not sure what's happening there. 1545, Purple Leaf Plum. died. 1451 Solano, Trident Maple. This is actually 1451 Solano on San Carlos. This is by the bank, I forget the name of the bank there, but it's in their backyard area. 1044 Stanage, another red bud. 738 Talbot, a flowering cherry. 1441 Thousand Oaks, another red bud. 1008 Ventura, another hawthorn. And 1221 Washington on Talbot, a Bradford pear. They have several Bradford pears. They're all inflicted with fire blight. So I'm expecting more over the next couple of years on this property. I also found a few more. I don't know why I didn't get these on my list, but there's dead trees. I'm not sure what they are. I just, in passing, I noticed dead trees. So there's 1003 Curtis, 847 Carmel, 934 Fillmore, and 923 Pomona. And they're all relatively small trees. Some of these I'll take out. Some of them I'll get to contractors to take out and grind the stumps. But I feel this is a good time of year. August is a good time of year. The soils are really dry. This is when the trees are really struggling, and a lot of them just give up. So I plan on doing this every year, every summer, to just do a total survey of the city and get these out. And also, we get them out soon, we could plant when planting season comes. So that's...
If we know of additional dead trees that are not on your list, how should we, can we email those to you?
You can email, yeah, or call them in or email, or yeah. There's on our website, there's several ways to contact me. There's service request, there's an email link, there's phone numbers. So.
I had a few questions, but the report seems very helpful, and also was wondering, how does it work for who pays? Because it sounds like you're proactively going out and identifying dead trees, which seems great, but how does that work? Doesn't normally the adjacent property owner make a request and pay fees, and then the city goes out?
I think the city is paying for all of these. There's one where a property owner applied, but the tree's been totally dead for a while, and he didn't pay a fee with it, and I said that's fine. And I think it becomes a safety issue if we're leaving a dead tree there. A lot of these, like the one that fell, had been dead for a long time. Property owners aren't acting on it. I think the city needs to act on it and just take them out and get new trees planted.
Question about how they apply for or how you can interact about planting the new tree. Does that adjacent property owner have that say?
I'm going to talk to them. If they want to discuss or pick a species, I'll allow that. If not, I will pick the species.
And just curious about how you decide what to plant there.
Basically, what's looking good on the block, I think, is a good way to
Okay.
do that. So.
And also, can you just, because you just rattled off the addresses, is there some way you can maybe forward that to the commission, just so, because we didn't have that as part of the public documents, and I just think it's
Sure.
practice to sort of let the public know too. I mean, I don't know how we can do that, or just to the commission. You don't
I think
mind.
it was in the packet, actually, the list.
The extra, no. He
Oh, the
just rattled off,
extra
like,
ones.
6
Oh, yeah, the
additional
extra,
ones.
Sure.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Okay.
I can add that to that.
I guess part of my question for the fee was to make sure it's fair for people who, is there an advantage for someone if the tree's looking bad to just wait until it's completely dead and then the city comes in?
That could happen, yeah.
And then one question I had was, we discussed a lot in the last year about the approved tree list, and I was wondering if your observations going around town and seeing what trees were dying informed your thoughts on that, and that if you thought it would be good to bring that up again to modify the list because of what you've noticed.
Well, yeah, the list is pretty new, so I don't know how often we want to revisit it. Like I said, I try to discourage people right now if they want a red bud. There are some good-looking red buds in town, but a lot more than not are looking like they're struggling. So
I'm forgetting if red buds were on the approved list or not.
they are.
They are, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, but things like the ornamental cherry were taken off. The Australian willow maybe should come off. Yeah.
Maybe it could be good if you, with this assessment, if you could come up with some recommendations that could inform a future revision of the tree list.
I could make recommendations, yeah.
Any other clarifying questions before we open this up to public comment?
Just quickly, are you anticipating this number of trees every year, or is just this a backlog you're getting caught up on? And it seems like a lot to me.
This, I would say it's a backlog, but I'm anticipating more dead trees. There are some, there are a lot of sad trees. We have a lot of mature trees. Camphors seem to come up every month.
That's true.
And there's one that's totally dead. I've noticed another one, I don't remember the address, that's near dead. I might even bring it up next month.
Do you think it's drought-related, or at least to some degree? I know it's hard to tell with certainty. But
Stress-related,
stress-related,
yeah. We had
okay.
drought, and then we have 2 years of heavy rain, and both of
Sure,
those
sure.
are stresses on some trees. So.
Okay, thank you.
At this time, if anybody in the public would like to comment on this presentation, this would be your chance to come up to the podium. And then we'll bring it back to the commission. I don't think there's any, this is informational only, so there's nothing else we need to do. Any final comments before we go on? And then I think, looks like no. John, did you want to speak to the redwood cleanup that was done?
Sure. Is this the only picture? Okay, well, we had a tree crew go out and do some work on the redwood grove and several other trees in Ocean View Park based on the tree risk assessment that we had done by an outside arborist. And this is the after picture. I didn't get a before picture, I should have, but before you wouldn't see through these trees. It would be basically black, darkness inside the grove there. We have. So we had one of our contractors go out and just limb up along the edges to allow visibility for people coming through the gate from University Village. And they climbed every tree and they removed all the dead branches, lots of dead branches, lower branches. And they mulched the entire grove with about, what we asked for was 4 inches of wood chip mulch. So they mulched it, we watered it down pretty well. They noticed a lot of bark beetle in the trees. We did remove one tree that was totally dead, and the trees near it have a lot of frass that's evidence of bark beetles in the trees. So we watered it, that kind of helps the flow in the tree, that helps the tree fight off bark beetle. Hopefully, with that and removing a lot of the dead wood, we're giving them a fighting chance there. So. And the mulch, too, which keeps the soil moist. One of the problems that the consultant pointed out was there's a lot of compaction in the soil, and redwoods in the natural habitat have a thick layer of duff mulch, basically, that keeps the soil moist and keeps it soft. And so hopefully the mulch is going to help with that. And if we need to, we replenish it every year.
Great. I could just comment that I've been there and it looks really nice with the trimming. So thank you for that work. And hopefully a lot of people will be using the group picnic area or the adjacent areas to enjoy them. Any other comments from commissioners or questions for John? Okay, thank you. So our next item on the agenda is an update on funding sources that I think Shelley's going to provide, just in terms of some of the questions that we had at our previous meetings around potential grants or other funding to support parks and recreation and open space.
I'm not sure if you guys can see that.
Can we turn down the lights with that? I'm going to pretend that's what's going on. It's not that I'm 40 whatever.
Certainly. There's the lights.
I just put together a brief chart because what's really in play right now is currently only one fund, which is Measure R. We have committed the Measure WW funds to projects that are almost all complete. The one fund that's in play, Measure R, before what's allocated for this year for bocce, the balance in that is 215.5, and that's mainly it. That's what I wanted to show you. There's an allocated amount of 32,000. That was from our previous, what we had anticipated bocce to cost, but that's included in that 215. And above that are just some projects that we have out there that the commission was interested in. The bocce is the 100% plans were done. I just wanted to give a quick status update on some of these for you. The middle estimate for bocce was basically 150,000, and we should anticipate probably having to contribute some money for our project managers now that Gail is retired. Those plans are, the package is complete. It's just waiting for the bid package to be put together, and then that would need to go to council to approve the funding. So that's a little bit in a holding pattern. Public Works, as I mentioned, is going through a shift with Gail retiring, a staff member moving up into that position, and then hiring new staff people. So we're in a bit of a holding pattern with them while they catch up. They're also, as most residents in Albany know, are dealing with a lot of sewer projects and street projects right now too. So that's consuming a great deal of their time. On this list, I wanted to make sure we included what the estimate we received for the mountain bike, which was 65,000. And just a note on that project could kind of be timed with the Saha project in that location due to the fact that we could get a lot of dirt from that site that they need to move out, which would be great for us and great for the development project. Also, I'm waiting for a little bit of assistance from Public Works in terms of getting that proposal to Caltrans. I need some technical information for that report. Dog park amenities, which we'll announce later, but I added this there. We don't know how much it will cost. We haven't started it, but with council's decision at their last meeting, this will be coming to you for consideration and how you want to approach the plan of that. And then Memorial Park path lighting, which we got passed through. This was a Gale project as well, so we're waiting on that. We only had one bid requested and came back, and it was pretty high. I can tell you that the cost of construction is extremely high right now, and so the note on that is we need to get some additional estimates to try to get that cost down. Then these I just listed below what I had mentioned before, and these are California State, their grants, and that's what the handout is. It's the Department of Parks and Recreation. Julia, I think it got stuck over there. It's on the back, and there's two that we have our eye on, or I have my eye on, and we have submitted information, requested information, and I have been in contact with the grant people about the status of these. And one is the per capita grant program. The next step for that is that they need to announce what the allocations will be for each of the cities. And they have not made that announcement yet, so we're waiting to hear back. We have our name in the hat for that. And that one would come with the city having to provide a 20% matching fund to whatever amount we get. I believe, and I don't have it written here, but I believe that the minimum amount a city, because it's based on population, was 200,000. So a matching for that would be was 40,000. But we're waiting to hear from that one. And then another one that is in there, which they abbreviate the RIRE, the Recreation Infrastructure Revenue Enhancement. We have a chance at this, and we don't know if we will or not, but that one has a particular qualification, which is the city of Albany would have had to have a voter approval between these dates of November 1, 2012 and 18 for a revenue enhancement measure that aimed at improving and enhancing local regional park infrastructure. And we did pass a Measure M. So I sent a note to the state, the grant people, and they said they know about Measure M and they think it could qualify, but they're not at that step yet. So these two are just in the holding pattern, and that's the update for those.
Great, thank you so much. Are there any questions from the commission about those, that report?
Yeah, I do have a couple, just since we're on this page, the question mark, is that the two? So I understand what you just said about that recreational is a 250 minimum. Is there an additional 200 something from the other? I'm just a little confused about the potential.
They're separate
Okay.
programs. That's the back page of the non-competitive programs. So the RIRE says at the bottom that it's a minimum award of 250. We don't know how that is calculated, but that would be a minimum.
Okay, so
in their
we're pretty much
program.
guaranteed that, or expecting that.
If they find that Measure M does qualify.
And if it doesn't qualify, do we expect anything
Then-
come through?
Not for that one, but then the top one, the per capita one, we have put our name in. That's basically what we needed to initiate, was to say, yes, we want to be part of the program, and all of the cities that applied, they're processing through all of those and dividing up those allocations, but they have not
it.
announced it yet.
So the 250 would be additional to?
Yes.
Okay.
Two separate, yeah.
I want to make one comment about the bocce. I believe that part of that cost of the 150, if it seems high, it was, of course, the courts themselves, but also a major drainage plan for that whole part of the park to potentially improve that.
Yes.
And then the Saha thing, if the mountain biking area is approved by Caltrans, and it sounds like that's in the works to get that proposal prepared, do you know roughly how long it would be before the Saha project would break ground?
I'm sorry, I don't know that. I haven't gotten to the status update unless someone attended the last
Did
meeting.
attend the open session that they offered for the public, and my recollection is that it's about a year and a half from now, because they'll be getting funding through 2020, and it would be in 2021 that they'd be breaking ground. That's my understanding, but I don't want that to be the word. Maybe we can circle back with the final, but that's the estimate that they gave in the public meeting a few weeks back.
Okay, good. I was there too, but I forgot. So.
Oh, that's right. We saw each other.
Yeah, okay.
I do have another question. I just want to understand the formatting. So existing fund Measure R, the amount is, what is a negative? What does that mean, negative 250?
Sorry, I got left in there. I was doing some
Oh,
math,
okay.
but yeah, no, it's 215.5. And then there's a set-aside amount for the turf feasibility study at Pierce Street Park, and so that's been set aside in the budget. But this is the remaining amount that is
After the
available.
32 is taken out?
32 is in that number.
Oh.
I'm just showing you that allocated out of the 215 is
Got it.
32.
So it's really, in terms of non-allocated, it's like just 180 something?
Yeah, but the 32 is actually allocated to the bocce project, so that's why I put the full number
Oh,
there.
okay, so
We would be asking for an additional amount of money in addition to the 32 for the bocce project.
Okay, and
This
so, but just to make clear, if we did if we're doing the bocce, which we already recommended, then we don't have money for anything else until some of those funds come through, right? I just want to make sure, because those other items aren't, there's not enough budget for those other items, right?
Don't have a calculator, but it would be the 215.5 minus 150. So if my math
Yeah.
people.
Oh, okay, sorry.
65.
Wait, it says 215. Oh, I
Yes,
see.
yes.
Well, 215 plus 32 is what the actual amount?
No, it's 215. I was just letting you know that this year we had 32,000 of that allocated to bocce, but the amount that we're going to be asking for is more than that. So we'd have to go to council to ask for the full amount.
So it's really 185 less 150 is what's left over if you leave the allotment for bocce in. Is that what I'm understanding? So it's 215, 32 is set aside for bocce, which brings you down to approximately 185. And then what you're saying, Julia, is if it's 150 for bocce, that wouldn't leave very much. It
That
only
leaves
like
15,000, yeah.
35,000 maybe.
35, okay.
Okay,
But not enough to fund any of the projects.
Any of the other, right. Is that right?
no, but that was fun. I know I confused everybody.
I think I got it
I
part way.
confused everybody. 32,200 was what was the portion of the 50,000. We've already spent 17 on design. We had 32,000 in this year, thinking that was going to be like part of construction. So if you wanted to say we already have this much holding for bocce, you could take that off the bocce total, like take out 32,000. From 150.
The 148.
That's how much more we'd be asking for this year.
Got it.
Or you just say 215.5 minus 150.
So it
That's
does
the
leave
remaining amount.
65,000.
Yeah,
basically,
65,000.
approximately.
Yes. Sorry, I made that really more confusing than it needed
So
to.
65 would be for anything else we might want to do.
Correct.
Just so I'm clear, Measure R does not work for the dog park amenities, which we'll be talking about later, but we would find that from another fund or from the general fund or some other way to fund those amenities.
That's correct. We would have to we'd have the city attorney look at the Measure R wording again and have him give us his call on a dog park. Mountain bike could qualify for Measure R fund. It has to be a recreation playfield, so community garden would not qualify for Measure R if there were changes to that, just as an example. Dog park in his my last time I asked him, he said it could, but he didn't give it a strong yes.
Thank you.
At this time, I think we have to take some public comment. So if anybody would like to, or we welcome that, you're welcome to comment on anything related to this particular presentation. Again, we will have time on the agenda for specifics around the other agenda items, but if you want to comment on the funding, please feel free to step up to the podium. And
Can I just ask a quick question?
but do you mind, just because people are watching on TV, so just so they can hear you?
I'd like to know how many bocce ball courts you're considering.
It's 2 courts. It's 2 courts. The project also incorporates some new park lighting in that area. It's a very dark section of the park, which will activate that section. It improves the access, a walkway that would connect to the UC Village back fence. It fixes the drainage of that area. It's basically traps water in the redwood grove, so it'll address the drainage in that side. It's not the path that runs from the UC Village back fence is not graded properly, and so it's backing up. It's not allowing that to drain. It also has a number of plantings, natives and other sorts that will provide some barriers and also to absorb some of that water that's coming in that section. There's a programmable space at the end of the bocce where you might have if you were rented for a party or something, a couple tables there so you can enjoy yourself, and benches for players and that active space.
Thank you.
Good evening, Jackie Hermes Fletcher. I just have a question about the bocce courts. They took away the only little patch of land that the Friendship Club can play on, and they're going to make a bocce court. I'm wondering how this will affect the garden, the Ocean View Community Organic Garden that's right next door.
Well, I would say that the garden will benefit greatly because of the fact that there'll be new lighting out there. It's a very dark area. As you know, when you walk back to the garden section at dusk, it's a very dark spot. There's one light at the corner there at the entry, and they'll put another light down where people are coming in from UC Village so that you have a pathway to make it through the park. So I think that'll be nice. It's also going to activate the space. So you'll have people back there in that area. The community garden can feel fairly isolated because it's way in the back of that park, and it's behind what used to be a very dark redwood picnic area. And so I think that you'll find that this will really activate that area and provide some company.
Are there a lot of bocce players all around the area? Really?
Yeah. Yeah.
I would say that the native plantings are also very pollinator attractive, which might have a benefit for the garden.
Any other comments? Any discussion from commissioners about this funding report? I think it's information only, so we
Just
can
very interesting, thank you, yeah.
appreciate you bringing the information back, and I know we'll be waiting with bated breath to hear our allotments for the coming year.
One quick question. Do you know roughly when we might hear?
The last update for the per capita one they said late summer, which we're there, and the RE is fall. Yes.
Great. I think with that, we'll move on to the next presentation, which we have a PowerPoint for. Shelley, if you wouldn't mind bringing that up. And that is an update for the commissioners and the public about the Community Garden Subcommittee, which is a new subcommittee of the Parks, Recreation, and Open Space Commission. This will just be an opportunity to briefly share some of the work that Hillary and Ben and I have done in partnership around exploring one of the items on our work plan. So the Parks, Recreation and Open Space Commission has a work plan that covers these 2 years, and one of the items is to investigate the relocation of a community garden, which came actually at request of somebody from the garden because of some challenges, which we'll talk about. So we've had an opportunity over the next, if you don't mind, I don't know if I can advance it, or do you mind if I just say next slide?
Yes, yes.
Great. This just, for those that aren't familiar, this is at the back of Ocean View Park. It's next behind the tennis courts and the Redwood area that we just recently saw. And we're just going to be talking a little bit about what we've learned and our opportunity to connect with the community garden earlier this summer, which was mentioned in the comment period. So this is just a picture of the beautiful gate into the garden. If you haven't visited the garden, I highly recommend that you do. It's a lovely spot and a beautiful sort of quiet, serene gathering place with lots of beautiful plant life. Our goals as a commission subcommittee were really to gather some information about the garden, to have a chance to visit the garden and meet with some of the garden leadership team, which we did in July, to gather general information about community gardening in the area just in general, to identify some of the challenges with the current site that were causing this request for kind of looking more deeply into it, and then also to identify some maybe possible solutions and look into the feasibility of some of those, and then to come back and provide this progress report to the commission so that we could identify some next steps. So this is just really an early midpoint for us in this process of gathering information, and we just wanted to keep you all abreast of what we've learned. On the next slide, you'll just see a beautiful photo. We took some photos on our visit with the garden leadership team, and we also have visited one other time with city staff and had an opportunity to just enjoy the beautiful garden plots. What we found, just some quick facts for those that may not know about the garden, is it was established in 2008. Like I said, it's in Ocean View Park. There's 18 plots, including 2 master gardener plots and 2 accessible plots. There's about 8 to 12 regularly involved gardeners from the report of the garden leadership team. It's advertised in the Albany Recreation Guide each time that comes out during the year. There are membership dues, and the gardeners host monthly open hours so that anybody can stop by at those times, and also host master gardener talks 3 to 5 times a year on different topics. So those are also open to the public. These just show the master gardener plots that are really well-trained and certified gardeners that have a lot of expertise that are able to sort of teach others and also model what they can grow in those areas. So that's a part of the community garden as well. Just to give the commission a sense of what has happened, we formed our subcommittee in the latter part of May. We had a planning meeting in June, and then in July met with the garden leaders and had a tour. And in that visiting, had an opportunity to identify some of the challenges and brainstorm possible solutions. In August, one of our commission members did a kind of unofficial riparian assessment, which she will talk about, and we also went and visited the site with the city staff to clarify feasibility on some of the solutions that had come up in our conversation with the garden leadership team. And then today we're presenting a progress report, and then we'll be formulating next steps, which will definitely involve going back with all this information to the garden team and also hearing questions and feedback from all of you that can help shape what might come out of this. So that just gives you an idea of what we've done so far. Apologize for this green, which is a little hard to see, but. And then again, just wanted to sort of offer, for those that haven't seen the garden, it's a very beautiful space. This is the tour that we got, and there's a lot of beautiful flowers as well as vegetables, which we see evidence of here. And I love dahlias, so that's why that picture's in there. And then on the next slide, some of the questions that we asked when we met with the garden was what's working about the current space, what are some of the challenges with the current space, what are your priorities, and then how feasible will it be to address those challenges within the existing space, and what other options are there for other spaces in Albany. So those were just things we were kind of brainstorming together and kind of hearing feedback about. And what was really clear is that along the current site, the main issue is shade. You need some amount of sun to grow plants, and there were some parts of it that were really affected by willow trees that are growing along the creek, and which is creating sort of a shaded area in part of the garden. There was also just a mention about it being nice that it's private and quiet, but it's also hidden away, so there's not a lot of passersby seeing the garden, knowing that they could participate, which may affect sort of membership. And currently membership's a little lower than we'd like it to be, or that they'd like it to be, and that may be related to the shade or some of the challenges that have happened. And then actually, one of our comments earlier was about that drainage ditch area, which is adjacent to the garden, but it's not super accessible right now. It's kind of overgrown. There's some fruit trees, and one person is using it for a planting area, but it's sunny and it's not currently highly utilized. So those were some challenges that we sort of talked about with the garden leadership team. And some solutions that were identified was exploring whether it's possible to cut back the trees more significantly and regularly to make an impact on the shade, or to look at adjusting the existing site layout so that we can maximize sunlight. Or is there a way to annex some sunny space adjacent to the garden and see if they could expand that way? Or should we explore alternate locations within Albany that would be more sunny and more conducive for gardening? So those were the things that we sort of left that meeting having identified, and we've done some work then since then gathering information. And at this point, I'm going to ask if Hillary would take us through the sort of highlights of the riparian assessment that she conducted.
All right, so I went out to Cordonices Creek in August and looked and was basically trying to understand, what is the potential likelihood of trimming back the willow trees, something that's been done to my understanding in the past, but the trees grow back, and so there's a lot of shade in some of the garden plots, and that limits their productivity, and so a lot of people aren't actually able to garden in those areas. So the willow trees are actually quite tall. They're 30 to 40 feet. There is a lot of dead growth in them, so they are something that should be addressed at some point. They are growing directly in the creek bed, which is interesting. It could be something that's limiting the flow of the creek because the creek is ephemeral and in this part at least, and so it's dry during the summer months. The reason why the creek is of particular interest to a lot of regulatory agencies is because it hosts steelhead, and steelhead are federally listed as threatened. When they list, and this is the distinct Central Coast population, and when those things get listed, they designate critical habitat. Cordonices Creek is not critical habitat. There are other creeks in Alameda County, like Alameda Creek, that are. So those are ones that are much more heavily kind of regulated, but this is still a location where they want to minimize the benefits or the negative aspects and amplify the existing benefits. So I was looking at it through this really regulatory framework because that's what my background is in. There are 4 agencies that would have potential jurisdiction over any actions of the creek. This includes the U.S. Department of Fish and Wildlife, again, because these are a federally listed species. There's also the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. They come in a little differently. Anytime somebody does something in a stream, that's when they have jurisdiction. They have something called a lake and stream bed alteration permit, and so you need to get one of those to be able to do work in a stream that might affect species or riparian trees. There's also the Regional Water Quality Control Board. What they look at is whether or not there are any like Susan Schwartz, who was in here earlier, talked about the foam that went into the stream. So they look at any impacts to water quality, so discharges is what they call them. And then, of course, there's the Army Corps of Engineers. They have jurisdiction over any navigable waters or tributaries to them. This is a tributary to a navigable water, and because the willows are actually in the creek bed, they are really interested in if equipment's in the creek or anything happens within the creek. If it were on the bed of the creek, they wouldn't have jurisdiction. There's some funny business where, when the Army Corps gets involved, then they consult with U.S. Fish and Wildlife and form a federal nexus. Not really important, but if you get one federal agency, you tend to get them both. So that's the framework. So what does that mean for trimming the trees? Well, I reached out to the California Department of Fish and Wildlife because I thought they might be the ones who would be the largest hurdle. Previously, the Regenerative Design Group identified the Regional Water Quality Control Board. They might be, but if you brought in equipment from the sides and trimmed the trees during after the bird nesting season, then you might not actually go into the creek and lead to a discharge, and so everything could be fine. So I thought really CDFW would be the hurdle. So I reached out to them and posed a hypothetical scenario in which there was, a garden next to a creek, and there were trees, and would they allow for regular pruning? And they said it sounds like the garden should be moved, or they need to deal with the trees. They were very opposed to the idea of removing riparian vegetation for this purpose. And my understanding is that the trees have, in some cases, been trimmed and grown back rather rapidly. In fact, it can stimulate growth. So in my personal opinion, I don't think there would be regulatory support. It would be a lot of hoops to jump through. Permitting can take a really long time, specifically if you're doing an individual permit. So I would say I don't think that trimming the trees would be a great option. One caveat is that the City of Albany is looking into developing something called a stream maintenance program. This is something that a lot of different jurisdictions are doing. It's a set of programmatic permits. So what's nice about that is you pre-identify the actions that you want to take to maintain your streams against flooding, fire, basically anything that would damage property or the species that are using them. And then you can, from that, have a 5-year permit that can then be renewed. And so say you were to identify, removing invasives and also trimming trees that might fall and then create a barrier that would potentially flood, say, the Ocean View School or is it called Albany Village? Then that would be something that they could go in and they could do that work under the programmatic permit. They tend to only like people to go in once every 5 years to a specific location. So again, if the trees grow back within 5 years, maybe not the best solution. So that is my incredibly long-winded, not short version of basically all the different things that might impact our decision to try to pursue permits to trim riparian trees adjacent to the garden.
So I want to thank Commissioner Sardinas for all that hard work and her knowledge on this topic. And I think maybe anyone listening that can understand why we went on to options 2 and 3 to explore what other possible solutions there might be and the feasibility of those. So Ben, if you wouldn't mind taking us through that,
Yes.
That'd be great.
So just a couple of quick remarks on this. Given that it looks like trimming the trees along the riparian corridor will not adequately address the shade issues with the community garden, there are some other options that we're going to continue to work with the gardeners to explore. One of them is to help them to reconfigure the use of the space so that there's more of the beds located within the sunnier areas within the garden. There may also be some opportunity to expand the footprint and the boundary of the garden to some immediately adjacent areas that benefit from some more sun. Including the drainage ditch that's immediately adjacent to the garden. I think that we still need to have some more discussions with city staff to make sure that's really a feasible option, but that might be something to consider. Then, of course, there's also the possibility of identifying a completely new location within the city to either move the community garden to that location or to keep the existing community garden and just add another community garden somewhere else. So these are all just some very preliminary ideas that we've identified as being on the table to consider. And our next step is to continue the dialogue with the gardeners, really make sure that we are having a collaborative relationship with them, to work with them to make this garden the best that it can possibly be. And I think we're looking forward to reporting back to you with the results of those continued discussions.
So I think that we'll pause there and say if there are any clarifying questions from the commission first before we move to public comment.
Just a quick clarifying question. So the discussion of the trees, those are the trees that are along the border with UC Village. Okay, so there's a creek there. I didn't realize there was a creek there, so that's cool. I didn't realize that Cornices went there. Okay, cool.
And I also believe that the creek there is owned by the university, and so an additional complicating factor is them assenting to go through this whole process of permitting with us.
And historically, they've been resistant, if I remember. Yeah, that's what I've heard.
And I will just say one other note, if that's all right, that I forgot to mention, which I alluded to the fact we did go with the city staff out to the site just to have a chance to get their thoughts about feasibility of some of the ideas of, if we identified better arrangements of things, is that hard? Is that too costly? And it seemed like there was a sense that probably with those supplies already being there, it wouldn't be that onerous to potentially work to reorganize things in a way that would better utilize the sunny spots and even potentially, if it was possible, to use that other space and sort of open that drainage area up, that would probably also not be too onerous either. So that was kind of a good counterpoint to the information that we got, which seemed quite onerous and unlikely to be as successful. So just wanted to mention that clarifying point. Any other questions or clarifying questions before we open it to public comment? All right, at this time, if anybody would like to make a comment about the community garden subcommittee report, feel free to join us. And I know some folks made some comments at the beginning as well. Thank you. I can look at the dahlias too.
No.
Hello, welcome.
Hi. Hopefully I can see. The fans sort of bothering my eyes a bit here tonight. Good afternoon.
Hello.
Hi, my name is Sharon Hunter, and I'm a longtime resident of Albany. I've lived here since about 1988. I've been a member of the garden since about 2010 or 2011. Don't know exactly which year. Feels like it's been forever. But the reason I'm here, I'm representing our gardeners regarding, just as you discussed, the need to trim the trees along the creek bed. And we, the gardeners, are urgently requesting that you do take on trimming of the willow trees. But after hearing what you said, I'm not so sure that happened. The members of our garden want all of our gardeners to be successful in their gardening endeavor. So in order for that to happen, we need sun. And right now, we don't have that much sunlight. And we have a lot of dead branches that are hanging over the fence next to our garden. And then we have about 10 plots, and I believe it's exactly 10, that are along the fence there by the creek, and those in particular really don't get any sunlight, or barely any. So in order for us to recruit and to maintain gardeners, we do feel that they need a reasonable amount of sun, because if they don't get that, they're not going to stay. And the need for the tree trimming has certainly been a constant struggle of ours. It's been going on since we've had our garden. And the gardeners have been advocating and continue to advocate for the right to more sunlight in the garden. To have a successful garden, as you all know, you can't do it with shade. When I first joined the garden, I was assigned one of those plots, and actually it was the very first one as you enter the garden by the park. And I was very disappointed that I could not grow the fruits and vegetables that I thought I would be able to grow. And as soon as a shady spot opened up, I requested it, and I did get one. And I have been very successful in this particular spot. But not only is it about the gardeners not having enough sun, but when they come into the garden, they spend $60 a year. They invest in buying seeds and plants and other items, and that's quite expensive. As well as, what is that?
Sorry.
Time up?
Yeah, maybe just wrap up. Yeah.
Well, I'll just wrap it up and say that we really do need help if we can get it from you regarding trimming of our trees, because without sun, we can't really grow properly. Hopefully you can give us help. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon.
Bye-bye.
Do you have any other comments? Oh, lovely.
We should put this on the agenda more often.
My name is Julie Knapp, and I'm going to talk about the wheelchair accessible plots that are at the garden right now. Recently, one of them, part of the bed collapsed. We have 2 wheelchair accessible plots, and the plot that part of it collapsed was used by a family for several years, and it was very beneficial to them. And so that plot needs to be repaired because right now it's unusable, it's not safe. Just based on some of the things that were talked about tonight and the report that we got, I'm really glad to hear that you talked about there being collaboration with the gardeners and the committee. There are gardeners that I've been there a while, but there are folks who've been there a long time and invested a lot of time and energy to really make it a beautiful space and very welcoming to people. Right now, there are plots that are empty, but since I've been there, it's kind of gone back and forth. There have been times where we've had empty plots and times where we've had people on waiting lists. So I think that speaks somewhat to the transitory, like it's been kind of focused for folks who, live in apartments or places where you can't grow a garden, and sometimes those, people maybe aren't staying as long. I mean, I'm not one of them. I've been living in Albany for like 20 years, renting, and it's been great for me to have this space. So I think the solutions for making more sunny places in the garden sound like they totally make sense and are reasonable. But I also think long-term that there's so much shade there. I'm just wondering what's going to be in the shady spot. Like, how is that space going to be used, so that it's good for the community? And I do think if there was some way long-term to find a different space that's sunnier, that would make more sense. I think more people in the community would use it. Personally, I love that it's hidden back and there's not a lot of people. I think the bocce court is neat, but personally, I don't want a lot more people back there. That's one of the things that I like about the garden, is that it's this private, serene space. So, yeah, that's
Thank you.
my viewpoint. Yeah.
Ooh, tomatoes
Just some
and
rosemary
flowers.
for tomato?
I've almost got dinner here. Step back.
Hi, good evening. Jackie Hermes Fletcher. Ocean View Community Organic Garden is the name of it, actually.
Okay, thank you.
And I have a question about the Village Creek. I thought that was the Village Creek going down by our, it is, it's the Village Creek going down by our garden. And we wondered if it was the tributary of Cordonesis. It's the
Now they
village.
get a map. I mean, I think they connect up. Yeah.
Because there's never been any trout around there. It's dry most of the year in the Village Creek
Doesn't
that
it
I've
go
seen.
up all the way?
Anyway,
Google map it.
back to the trees. The school, Ocean View School, goes out there and trims the entire trees on the other side of our garden. They just trim them way back. So why are they doing it and we aren't doing it? Doesn't make sense to me. I also, one day I was in the garden and I saw a bunch of workers trimming the trees from the other side, from the the village side. And we're looking at all these dead branches falling down. We had 10 master gardeners there last week, 20, at a meeting, and they were going, what's going on with these trees? They're just falling in your garden, and they're dead trees all over the place. I said, I don't know, we're gonna go talk about it. So people are watching this, and from not just from our area, a little tiny garden, but a lot of people have commented on it. So my big burning question is, why can't we, why can't we have the trees pruned like any other trees? They're just weeds, they're willows. I mean, they grow like weeds, I mean. And why does the school get to do it and we don't? We just can't understand it. Everybody's talking about it all the time. So can you please find out why Ocean View School can hire workers and cut their trees all the way back behind the fence, and we can't? Big question.
That's the Ocean View School or UC?
Ocean View School. Oh, and then I was in the garden one day and I saw workers on the other side at the village, and I don't know where they're from. They were also cutting the trees on that side away from the houses there. So how come they get to cut all the ones over there? Somehow we're being thwarted not to be able to cut the trees away from our garden that are hanging into the plots.
I mean,
it just doesn't make sense.
I would posit that it's probably unpermitted, right? The work that they're doing, so could.
They do it every, twice a year. They just trim them back.
Yeah.
That's all we're asking.
Yeah, but
Not
I think
asking to
also
take them
the
down.
complication is that it is like owned by the university, so if they're doing it on their side, then that's all right. But I don't have the answer to that.
Okay, I was wondering if you could all please find that out.
That's good.
Ocean
Good
View
question.
School,
Good question.
UC workers, why are they cutting them everywhere around except the part we have? Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for all the wonderful reports. Really enjoyed seeing you in our garden.
Thank you.
I do want to say that we had the trees trimmed because the parts that were hanging over into our side of the property, so they were trimmed last year. Maybe it hasn't been a year yet, but trimmed straight up the fence, just fence line straight up, but not on the other side of the fence.
And that really helped. And if that could be done twice a year, that would be great. Better than nothing at all. I wanted to thank you all for putting this topic on your agenda. We have felt neglected for a very long time, and so it's been really nice to have you talk about the garden, and I hope that it will be on your agenda frequently. And I also hope that you can make a lot of money available for gardens, just as you have a lot of money available for sports facilities. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments from the public on this topic? Is there any discussion or questions or guidance or thoughts from folks on the commission about this as we contemplate the next steps of our work?
Yeah, I would say it does sound like it's worth revisiting what creek that really is and what restrictions there actually are, because it sounds like people are trimming trees all around there, and so maybe that is a possibility to actually do tree trimming there.
I think there's a big difference between pruning back a few strategic branches and doing, a cut that's really radical. So I think that's also perhaps. I mean, I know that we're dealing with an issue of permitting, but is there some sort of intermediate step that can take place other than completely giving it a severe a severe cut that might impact the creek as opposed to something that's hanging over a fence, because I know that sometimes that is a possibility.
I mean, I think they have trimmed along the fence line. The problem is that the trees, like on both sides, are very tall, and so what you would need to do to effectively trim them is to bring them down to a lower level, because that's the main issue. It's on the south side of the garden, and so the sun kind of just goes there. And then behind them are actually the University Village apartments, and those are at least 2 stories, and I don't know how far they shoot, but they abut the creek pretty closely, and so there's just a lot of issues with shading there. I'm almost positive it's Cordonices Creek. I'm 99%, but I'm trying to look it up on Eco Atlas. I just can't get it to connect to the internet. It's sort of
I think you're right. I think you're right.
yeah.
I just want to say thank you guys for this really deep, engagement with the community garden community, and also just posing really good questions and coming back with that information. So thank you. First of all, wondering about in terms of how much sun there is. I mean, I'm sure you've looked into how many hours of sun too, right? But just wondering do you feel like with the sun that does exist in the part that's not where the picnic tables are, that would suffice?
I mean, if you're asking my professional or my personal non-professional opinion, what I would say is that even when we were visiting with the gardeners and after the tour and we were sort of looking at the spaces, if you go back, actually, Shelley, if you wouldn't mind, to the option 2 slide, what you'll see is that the sun shines directly on the shed and in parts that are open and walkable. So one of the thoughts that we had talked about was, is it possible to just move the shed to the shady part? Is, composting or seeding, or what are some of the uses, and is there a way to capture some of that space to use that for gardening? I don't know, and I don't know what the preferences are in terms of how people use it. That would certainly be a deeper conversation with the community, but it seemed to us that there might be some relatively kind of low-hanging fruit, so to speak, in just reorganizing the use so that the sunny parts could be better captured. It doesn't solve the issue of along that edge you have a shade, and it's probably going to be shady unless we can figure out the trimming part. But there probably would be ways to optimize that shady part, even for shady gardens or compost or whatever, if you could still really utilize all the sunny parts. And the good news is that if the drainage ditch area turns out to be if the city staff feel that it could safely be utilized better, that's all sunny, and it goes the entire length of the garden. So while we don't have a lot of information there yet, it seems like that's potentially a way to expand the footprint, expand the sunlight, and make that more of a contiguous space. If that, however the usage works and whatever the sort of garden team feels would make the most sense, but it seems like when we looked at the space, there was adequate sunlight in some areas that don't have any planting happening. And so maybe we could figure that out, at least to recapture those plots that are shady relative to the total number of plots. If it's 6 or 7 or whatever that are really suffering in the shade, could we capture enough space to make that number and make the garden whole? And then, you could use the shady part for something else.
Yeah. So it sounds like the next step might be some sort of plan, right? Like
a workshop with the community, or
even just I feel like I feel like a landscape architect would probably be very helpful to just giving a quick, I don't know, I'm just thinking in terms of next step, right? Because they can look at that and say, hey, that's kind of their business. So just wondering if there is a next step for trying to reorganize that space.
There is, yes. So am I on here? Yeah, so I think our next step is to continue our discussions with the gardeners and discuss some of these preliminary ideas that we have, get their more specific reaction to them, and then work with them to sort of further study and explore the issue. I don't know what city budget is available to hire professionals to assist with that, but we definitely want whatever we do to be fact-based and something that will actually be effective to address the gardeners' concerns. So I think a lot more discussions need to be had to further explore some of these ideas.
In terms of just from my own experience from home, you can actually sometimes hire a landscape architect just to do a quick consult. It doesn't have to be a full-blown plan. couple hours of their time walking that space and just sort of having a conversation. So just a suggestion.
Thank you, that's great.
Right. We looked it up on Eco Atlas. It is Village Creek, and Brian also helped me. But I still would maintain that I think that like the regulatory agencies would not agree to do this. I mean, I think that they basically, like any creek that you're adjacent to, they kind of go up in arms. They brought up a number of additional like instances in other parts of Alameda County where people wanted to trim creeks. Like there was a car dealership that wanted their sign to be more visible, and they would not allow it. So I think that they're like trying to crack down on any sort of like riparian tree trimming, but we can definitely try and figure out how other agencies are able to do it. Typically you should be able to trim trees if you're outside of the bird nesting season. It's just riparian habitat kind of gets additional scrutiny.
It seems to me like activating the drainage ditch area has real potential. When do you might hear about that, or you have any idea? Or
So we have reached out to Public Works to have a further conversation about what even the options are, and just to also make sure that it is not, you know, something that would be limiting in terms of safety or needing access. But there seem to be some possibilities there, but we need to talk with the Public Works team to have a little bit more detail. And I believe, Shelley, you were also asking the firm that was looking at the bocce space, whether or not they had any thoughts about that as well, in terms of quick solutions or easy solutions that might not necessitate sort of a major project, but would be adequate.
Yeah, and that idea came up within the bocce discussion about removing that fence, if you remember that part, and so that at least it felt like the garden wasn't caged in. And then that's where that idea kind of started with, from the architect. So we can look into that more, and then I will continue to get to work on getting the ear of Public Works.
Perfect. And like we said, this is just a preliminary update, so there's a lot of still, you know, work to do, but we were excited to be able to share what has happened, and also to have this opportunity to hear from members of the public and also from you all. So we'll look forward to future updates when we have more information. Okay, and now for the topic next on the agenda. I want to just say, because we have had such enthusiastic and passionate public interest in this next agenda item, as I mentioned at the start of the meeting, in case anyone is coming late, we are going to ask when we get to comment periods to have
Maybe 1 minute.
we're going to actually, well, I feel like
show of hands, who's planning to speak?
yeah, what we could do is ask if you agree with what someone is saying at the podium, you can raise your hand. That will help us get a sense. Is that what you mean?
No, now get a show of hands of how many people are planning to speak.
Oh, how many people are planning to make a comment? Okay.
That's not so many.
So I think we can leave it at 2 minutes. Thank you all for being here. I want to thank you all for, and anybody at home that may have submitted or watching on YouTube that may have submitted an email or a letter. We've read them all, and we really appreciate your thoughts and feedback. So to get us started on this item, I'm going to ask Shelley to kick it off with her staff report.
Thank you. I want to also acknowledge that I think it's wonderful the amount of engagement we've had from tennis users and pickleball users. I think as of, from my count, as of this afternoon at 1, when I printed the packet, we had like 119 emails, comments. And so anybody who made a comment after the 1 o'clock cutoff, those comments will be part of the public record and put in tomorrow when I get back to my office. But rest assured, the commissioners receive them in their email boxes today. So the staff report really, I'm not going to read it verbatim, but it does talk about some of the history of pickleball in Albany. We started it in the adult sports program as a drop-in kind of fun thing in 2012, and we used to tape the lines on the courts every time we were playing. And this commission, and I think it was 2015, decided to actually paint permanent lines on the courts. So there are 4 courts currently on Ocean View tennis courts. I will say they're probably not aligned in the best configuration, but they've been serving the pickleballers since then. important things about just basics about the city of Albany. We have 8 tennis courts in total. There are 2 at Ocean View that are lighted. There are 4 at Memorial that are lighted. And then there are 2 at Terrace that are not, they do not have lights. The court fees are set in the master fee schedule, and that information is in the staff report. I also provided this chart, and this is just the basic how many reservations do we have for the various users of all of our tennis courts for the past 2 years. So this is July 17 to July 19. And this just gives you an idea of who is using the courts. Again, this is just reservations, so I want to make a note.
Can we turn the lights off?
Yeah.
Can we do that?
Thank you. Then there's a little magic person in a room that turns them back on. It's amazing. Yes, so this just represents reservations, official permits that have come through our office in the Recreation Department. That I want to make sure you know that our courts can be used as drop-ins, so people can come play tennis. If someone doesn't have a permit, you're totally fine. If someone shows up and they actually have paid for the use of the court, then you'd have to move off of the court. And I don't know if there's any questions about that, but that was just to give you guys an idea of who and where people are using our courts. Typically on the size of pickleball courts, layouts, you can fit 4 pickleball courts on a tennis court, and that has been demonstrated in many different ways, either by just painting lines over the tennis court. So you have a number of different lines on the court. It's pretty typical in a gym setting. You might find volleyball courts, basketball courts, badminton courts, all painted on a gym court. Or people have converted tennis courts into 4 pickleball courts and actually make them dedicated courts with nets that are permanently installed. And that has recently happened at Cedar Rose Park in Berkeley. They opened it in August. Yay! I'm glad people are excited about that. That is really fun. There's a group here today that we run, the city, our adult sports, we run a drop-in program. There's a 1 night a week at Ocean View and then a weekend Sunday at either the high school or middle school gym. And then there is a very dedicated group that uses our courts and other courts regionally to run leagues, practice, drop in, teach the game of pickleball. And we have a representative to talk about that. In your packet, I did provide just a basic illustration of what the court layout looks like, so you have a visual for that. And I just want to note, and I think you can tell by the number of comments and input you've received, that we sent out the information about this topic being on the agenda tonight to pickleball users, tennis users, and then main tennis people are sending it out to their tennis groups. We've also posted at the parks to make sure that if we miss somebody in there that they knew about it, and then it goes out in our basic emailing out. So I'm happy to see that there are so many people that have responded and are here this evening to talk about it. The one proposal, or the proposal that in general, if you're talking about looking at the 2 courts and converting them to 8, I just went and asked for an estimate. What does that cost? That would be the maximum that you could do out there. And so I provided that number out there. And that, again, that's just one estimate, but just as a guideline for the commission, and that was $43,400. That's for painting 8 courts, repainting it, painting 8 courts, and for permanent nets, with leaving the tennis. I told you, there's a little guy. Leaving the tennis court nets there, that acts as a kind of a barrier between the courts. But that is just a reference for you in your discussions tonight. You can ask questions on that, or I'm going to invite up Kathy to do a short presentation from the pickleball group.
Thank you. It's not ripe yet. Okay.
Okay, so I can manage here?
There's got to be a joke here about the kitchen or something.
I changed it to a PowerPoint, so the bottom right, bottom right, there's a little icon for putting in the slideshow.
like that.
Can you see it?
The very bottom right. Oh, okay. Okay, thank you. Great. Hi, everyone. My name is Kathy Taruskin, and I'm the USAPA Pickleball Ambassador for this area. That just means that I'm here to help promote the growth of pickleball locally. There's a website you can go to and put in your zip code and find out whether or not there are any pickleball places to play in your area. And when I first did this in 2015, this is the result that I got. Whoops. Yeah. So there were three choices in the whole East Bay, and I was elated to see that Albany was one of them. Otherwise, I would have had to go out to Walnut Creek to learn how to play pickleball. If you go and enter that, go to that website today, this is what you're going to see. A huge explosion of pickleball in the East Bay. And where there was no pickleball in San Francisco or Marin 5 years ago, now there are places cropping up all over the place. Shelley already gave you a little history of the pickleball at Ocean View because Ocean View was really the trailblazer. So we'll skip over the painting of the lines and everything, but that was a monumental change for us because where we used to only be able to play when someone put down the tape and lowered the nets and so on, which was once a week in Albany, having the lines down enabled us to set up our own sessions and play whenever we wanted. So over a period of time, we added sessions for Saturday, Sunday, Wednesdays, and Fridays. So we were meeting, 5 or 6 days a week and playing for 2-hour sessions at Ocean View. In 2019, starting next month, they're starting an after-school program of pickleball at Ocean View in the after-school care. A lot of us call ourselves addicts because we play 4 to 7 times a week. Bell has trained over 150 people just in 2018, and Darlene over there is training people like you can't keep up with it at Cedar Rose and at Bushrod Park in Oakland. Our mailing list has doubled in the last 3 months from 160 to 330, and currently there are about 18 drop-in sessions between Albany, Berkeley, El Cerrito, and I didn't even include the Oakland drop-in sessions, just the 3 towns. For a period of 6 months last year, we kept really detailed statistics on how many people were showing up at Ocean View, and those counts are on the right. So a total of 2,151 times in 6 months, someone came to play pickleball at Ocean View or at the high school. The sessions averaged 14 to 16 people each time, and at the high school, that was even bigger. That was indoors on Sundays, and they would have 20 to 40 people on a Sunday evening every single Sunday. High school is no longer available because of some problems in the gym, so they're stuck in the middle school now. Oops. Oops, hold on. Okay, whoops, I'm going the wrong way. Okay, now I got it. Okay, a big change was last month when Cedar Rose in Berkeley created their first dedicated pickleball courts. These are the closest pickleball courts that are exclusively pickleball, no multi-purpose courts at all. KPIX came out and took an aerial drone shot of opening day. And on the right-hand side, you see what's becoming a typical Sunday and typical day, actually, at Cedar Rose. I put this picture in because it really illustrates the generations that are playing there now, which is a surprise to us as well. On the right-hand side, you see 2 middle schoolers playing with their parents. The far back court is another middle schooler with 3 adults. On the left-hand side, we have people in their 40s, 50s, and 60s, and we have our 79-year-old person playing there, I'm sure, too. This is really thrilling for us to see all the kids that are starting to play, and the Ocean View program will help that. I think if we get permanent courts at Ocean View Courts, we would do some outreach into Albany Village and start getting some of those kids over there to learn how to play with parents. We started a Google group of people interested just in Cedar Rose, and it went from 0 members on August 15th. Today, it has 188 members already. So now let's step back and look at Ocean View. This is an aerial shot of what the courts look like right now. So you can see that it's 2 tennis courts, but it's overlaid with 4 pickleball courts. The pickleball courts lines are green. The tennis nets are too wide for pickleball, and you might think that doesn't make a difference, but it really does. There are certain shots you cannot do on these courts. The nets are too high, so we have to lower them when we play pickleball. The 2 extra courts that go east-west overlap the 2 tennis courts so that there was less interference with play. That's what our original thought was. But it turns out that means that if a pair of people show up and want to play tennis singles on the court while we're playing pickleball, that's going to knock out 3 out of the 4 pickleball courts. So 12 people have to leave or get off the court to allow a tennis game to happen. It's also, considering the fact that you can fit 8 courts in this space, it's a real waste of space to only use it for 4 courts. The lines are very confusing, and the coloring of the background is not confusing for the tennis players, but it has no meaning at all for pickleball. Some green is good, some red is good, and so on. If you're going to use those portable nets, you have to be able to either own your own net and bring it, or you have to know the combination to the lockbox where we keep the nets. The other problem is that the pickleball courts are over wide, so over big. So, if you miss a ball, it's going to roll all the way back into the corner of the tennis court. And almost every game, you're going to have to stop 2 or 3 times while everyone goes to round up all their balls and load them into their pockets. You buy clothes that will hold balls, basically. Okay. Okay. I don't want to compare tennis and pickleball. I love both sports. Most of our players, or a lot of our players, are tennis and pickleball players. But I do want to compare the facilities that are available for the 2 sports. Obviously, when the tennis courts were built years ago in Albany, Berkeley, and El Cerrito, it wasn't like they sat around and said, choose between pickleball and tennis, let's do everything tennis. Pickleball just was unknown. So we're kind of left with a situation that's historical, that only tennis courts were built, and pickleball has to adapt if it's going to share the space. We would not like nothing more than to have new space, not use tennis courts at all. We would love that, but no one has stepped forward to offer any kind of territory. So what I'm comparing in this chart is how many people are accommodated by pickleball courts versus tennis courts between the 3 cities right now. We only have the 4 courts at Berkeley accommodating 16 pickleball players, whereas between Berkeley, El Cerrito, and Albany, there are 44 tennis courts, 54 if you count the ones that are in the school districts. And I wanted to be conservative, so you have the 2 choices. Since tennis is more often played as singles, you say 108 people can play concurrently, but if they play doubles, you'd have 216. Versus only 16 pickleball players. If Ocean View were converted, the numbers would change this way. We'd jump up to 48 spots for pickleball to play at one time, and the tennis numbers would drop down, but not so significantly. You still have over 100 spaces for tennis players to play between the 3 cities. I think the question is not really how many courts there are, but where are the empty courts? So I think the real issue is, why isn't there an app that can tell you with the closest empty tennis court so you don't have to hop around and look for it all over the place? So our proposal is to convert Ocean View to 8 tennis courts, 8 pickleball courts. The diagram on the right shows what that would look like. It's a tight squeeze. It's not ideal pickleball space either. It's tighter than what you'd really like, but we really, really need the courts. The photo on the left is a real example of 2 tennis courts that were converted. They're a little bit wider than Ocean View, so that whole inner center area, the center strip that has seating, that would be fabulous if we had it at Ocean View, but there just isn't room for it there. When we talk about having 7 or 8 pickleball courts, the reason we have that ambiguity is that we're thinking it would be better to have 7 dedicated courts with 7 permanent nets. But if you look in the upper left-hand corner, that court does not have a permanent net. It's just painted for pickleball. If we did Ocean View that way, we could use that 8th court for seating, because one of the problems is you don't have a place to hang out. And I think if you read all the letters that people wrote, that's half the fun of pickleball, is all the socializing you can do and getting to know people as you are waiting for courts to become available. So in this example, the tennis net was left there, as Shelley said, to keep as a barrier between the north and south courts. But the 8th court is flexible in how you would use it. So in summary, we've already raised $8,000 towards this effort. We really desperately need more court space. We're continuing to fundraise. We're going to have a benefit concert in October. The 96 emails that you already got that are in favor of pickleball really highlighted a lot of the benefits people are feeling, but showing a lot of families that are starting to play together, health benefits, weight loss, depression, stress relief, and a big point people all talk about is the new friendships, the people that they've met that they would never have met otherwise. The high attendance numbers that we're getting and the long waits at current facilities are just emphasizing the need for having more facilities. And thanks to Cedar Rose is Times Square in terms of visibility. Ocean View, as people are talking about the garden and everything, it's so hidden away. You have to go up to the court and look behind the windscreen to see what's actually happening there. So I think that's one of the reasons some of the tennis players don't seem to realize how much pickleball is going on there on a regular basis. But they're going to know about Ocean View because Ocean View has lights, and we are just going to need the space. So I hope, actually to the tennis players, I really hope, regardless of how this turns out, I really hope you'll take some time to read some of the emails that the pickleball people wrote, because they're very heartfelt the way they've changed some people's lives. And we all want to be friends and work together on this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Did I take any questions?
I think what we're going to do is allow the commission to ask clarifying questions of Shelley or of you, and then we will go to public comment, and then we'll have a discussion. So, so do commissioners want to pose any clarifying questions before we dive into the comments?
I suggest you stay there. I think we're probably going to have some questions for you.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
How about I start? I know that we don't have data on drop-in use of Ocean View Park for various activities. I'm just wondering if you can give us a sense anecdotally of when those courts are being used. Are they being used more for pickleball than for tennis, and some sort of order of magnitude of how much more, if that's the case?
You're right that I can't tell you. We don't have staff on site that monitors those courts all day long. What I can tell you, though, is that the amount of time that we have it actually permitted use is pretty high on Ocean View. And in fact, the amount of non-tennis use at Ocean View is at 80% in terms of our reservations there. And that is done out of the fact that we, as a staff, we knew that the courts were not being utilized to their fullest. So that's why you'll see that there's a baby boot camp on Saturday mornings for an hour, or during the weekdays in the mornings for an hour, or that the after-school program is scheduled over there in the afternoon. It's been not as, it hasn't been seen as the primary tennis spot necessarily in Albany. With Memorial is where is really the feature spot because it has the 4 courts. The high school tennis teams in St. Mary's tennis uses those courts quite a bit, and it has lights. If you're having a tournament, it has 4 courts, and for high school tennis, that's a requirement for it. But I wouldn't want to venture to say exactly how much I think drop-in is happening. I will say that one effort we've been trying to make in terms of pickleball, because pickleball was doing a lot of drop-in as well, and we made that very clear to them. They need to start reserving the courts so we can track how much pickleball is actually using Ocean View in the future, and they have been doing that as of late.
Brian, did you have any questions?
So the parking lot at Ocean View is not very big. I know there's some street parking. We talked about at a previous meeting that there's like that mulch drop area that could potentially be expanded. But I guess I'm just thinking like there's a lot of things that go on at Ocean View. Friendship Club, they have like spaces where, you know, they have to be left open to be picked up. So I guess I'm just curious whether Ocean View is like, it seems like it was kind of default picked as the best place for these courts, but I guess I'm wondering, like, maybe the only other place would be Terrace, and they don't have great parking either. But if you can just walk us through, like, why Ocean View, and can it actually accommodate like a lot more traffic if pickleball is there really regularly?
It is a good question, and I'm always happy when there's not enough parking because it means places are being used. But you're right, the addition of additional players would impact parking in that area. Ocean View was the suggested site. That's where pickleball started for us, and that was mainly out of the fact that's where we run all of our adult sports programs is at Ocean View Park, and it was also driven by the fact of the tennis reservations, and that the court was more underutilized, and that it has lights. That is a draw for adults, and this is typically more of an adult-driven sport. Not to say the kids won't be out there, but typically kid use is more in that 3 to the 6 time slot.
I had a question, 2 questions actually. A number of the communications alluded to if we had 7 or 8 courts, it would be allowing for tournaments. I'm just curious, does the space like at Cedar Rose Park with 4 courts, will that allow for tournaments, or is there some threshold at which you need to have X number of courts to be able to host a tournament? That's my first question.
Okay. I think, I'm not a tournament director, but I think 8 would be the minimum you would want to have for a tournament. I will tell you that of that $8,000 we raised, $4,300 of it was through a ladder league that we held. We couldn't hold it at Ocean View, so we held it at Castro Park in El Cerrito. They have 6 courts, and we had a waiting list. You know, so there was a demand, and if you had 8 courts at Ocean View, that would be, definitely a good revenue for the city because it was a really popular activity. But I'd say 7 or 8 is about the minimum for a league or a tournament.
Thank you. And then that actually touches upon my other question, which was I loved your table about the dedicated courts, but what would really help me is also to see the column that's about the striped or available courts that maybe aren't solely pickleball, but that are also available for people to play, because you just talked about El Cerrito, which is a 0 up there in terms of dedicated courts, but yet it's a place people are playing. And what I've noticed just around the community is that, as your map shows, increasingly there's more and more, courts going up, but they may not be dedicated, or some are and some aren't. And so it'd just be helpful to see that data.
Okay.
Kind of up against that.
I could modify that slide to show that, but the caveat is that they would have to have their own nets or know how to get them. So,
which is an accessibility issue, definitely. In terms of limiting people, I get that. Yeah.
Okay.
So that actually plays right into my question, and that is, what's the advantage of the permanent nets over the temporary nets? I'm allowed to ask questions, folks.
Okay.
Sometimes I ask it to inform the audience. Sometimes I ask leading questions so other people will hear the answer.
You can't really leave the portable nets out, so you have to know how to set them up, which kids wouldn't really know how to do. And you have to be able to lock them up, somewhere overnight, which means you need to know the combination to be able to get to them again. trying to think of what, as long as they were portable, pickleball nets, that, it's better than using a tennis net for sure. But there wouldn't be a real reason if you're leaning towards keeping it multi-purpose. If I go back to that slide of all the
I'm not leaning towards anything. I'm asking the question
Okay.
about what
Okay.
you see the advantage of a permanent net is over.
They just are more fragile and less durable.
Okay, thank you.
This is a general question overall. I'm just curious about what would a conversion entail? I mean, it's clearly, it's restriping, it's putting in different nets, but is it also resurfacing?
The condition of Ocean View is pretty good, so not necessarily resurfacing, but repainting it all one color. Right now, it obviously has tennis courts on it, and then painting the pickleball court. So that is a different color. It makes it better for play, so you can see where the ball hits. You can see from some of those pictures that I believe the kitchen area is a different color than the main section, and there's a specific part of the game that's a really important area for the game. But the quote for the estimate was basically of the repainting it all, the other color, restriping it, removal actually leaving the nets, but then installing the permanent nets at each one of 8 courts.
I have a question about this other non-tennis usage of Ocean View. You mentioned that it's sometimes city programming. Just wondering if you can give us a scope of that non-tennis use.
No, at Ocean View, non-tennis use, we do rent to the baby boot camp, which is a rental. So it is a revenue generating thing for us. And that, I believe, is 4 days a week, 1 hour, 4 days a week. It's a popular class. They do it on the courts because it traps small children, because you can bring your child. It's a mom, parent, guardian class. We also run a soda tax boot camp out there on the weekends, which is a free class to residents. Sometimes we'll have unscheduled use as well, but the school district might come over on different PE times. The park is used by Ocean View for their PE, so the field is used, and sometimes they'll use the tennis courts to play if the field is wet too.
The school, the Ocean View school,
Yes.
okay.
Yeah.
So just curious if they've been in conversation about this at all.
The amount of use that they have is very minimal. It's just on a kind of, they go over, the grass is too wet, they might go play something else. We also have camps that are on the field. We just had a soccer camp, and they might go at lunch and use the courts to play soccer tennis on those courts. So it's a little more informal than the reserved use. The tennis courts are actually city property. Ocean View is a unique site in that it is partly the school district property, which is basically from the tennis courts towards the school is the school property, part of the ball field. And then tennis courts to the USDA line is city property.
I had a kid's question. The Friendship Club, do you know how often, I think it goes up to 5th grade, is that right? Or is it middle school as well? Or?
Age?
Yeah.
Yes, it's 1st through 5th.
1st through 5th. And do you know if they use the tennis courts with rackets and tennis balls, or would the older kids be able to use pickleball courts?
They don't use it as like a program part of their day. They do use the tennis hitting wall, but to play kid games with the ball. I don't know the name of it, but with a large rubber ball.
Wall ball.
But it could become programming if there were pickleball courts there. Obviously, they're not going to go and set up those nets and things. But there isn't like a formal schedule to use it as tennis courts.
So another question I have is, if there are only tennis courts with lighting, do they get used more like at night? And what could Albany do to potentially have other tennis courts with lights at night? Or are there other very nearby opportunities where people could...
Memorial is lighted, so...
It is also lighted?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Terrace was the one that didn't have lights.
Terrace does not have lights. It's a very terrace, if you'll picture terrace, it's right in the middle of the neighborhood.
Right.
2 courts there surrounded by...
So there are other options for people to go to at night?
Yes, yes.
We have this nice line of trees blocking the light from the courts to UC Village. It's very handy.
Bring it all full circle. All right, so thank you so much for
I
presenting.
have
Oh,
another
sorry,
question.
Ben.
Another question for our guest presenter. So would you be interested at all in having just one of the tennis courts converted to permanent pickleball courts? So if the choice is between converting one of them to 4 courts or keeping the status quo, what would be your preference on that?
That would be better. That would be better than nothing, because you could use all 4 at any time, even with tennis going on next to you. The problem with that, though, is that there's no seating, because the tennis court takes, the full tennis court size, and because the pickleball courts are so compressed into the one single tennis court, there's no room for a bench or anything on the pickleball side. So I think that the pickleball people would end up sitting on the bench on the far side of the tennis court and assuming no one's going to be playing tennis. You know what I mean? It's just a seating problem.
Do we have usage statistics about the hitting wall area? Because I know it had mulch on half of it. We were looking at that for our previous agenda item, but I was curious if that is a space that we know the usage of and/or if that's appropriate for seating.
I don't have any information. It's not, we don't rent that space. I do know that Friendship Club uses it daily.
Okay.
And as you saw, just us being there, someone was using it as a tennis wall. The mulch, I don't think impacts people using it as a hitting wall. But there, if you can picture Ocean View, the gate to enter the tennis courts, there are actually 2 gates, one on the west side of the northwest side and one on the northeast side, which we don't use, we just keep it locked. But there's an opportunity there outside of the tennis courts. There's extra space between the tennis courts and the ball field. There's an unusually wide access area there that could provide potential seating as well.
Thank you. Any other questions to clarify from the commission before we open this up for public comment? Okay, thank you. So at this time, we are going to open this topic for public comment. I want to just repeat that we're going to set a 2-minute timer. And I also want to say, if you would like, you can state your name and where you are from. You don't have to, but if you do this, I want you to know it'll be part of the public record. That's what the city clerk advised me to say, so I've read it. So if you'd like to come up, those that said they would like to make comments, feel free to come up one at a time, and we'd love to hear from you. And again, thank you all so much for being here. And you're welcome to raise your hand if you agree with the comments that are made from the podium.
If I can add one thing too, if you know you want to make a comment, it's fine to kind of start queuing up like 1 or 2, and then just kind of keep an eye on that and file, and that'll make it go a little faster.
And if you can use the raising of the hands in lieu of applauding, it'll just help keep things efficient and so we can all hear. So thank you so much.
Yeah, I live in Albany. I've lived here for quite a long time. Played tennis since I was a boy. Tennis use goes up and down, and pickleball is growing. And I happen to play at Ocean View 3 or 4 times a week, maybe a half hour to an hour at most, and usually off the wall, but on the courts also. In fact, I played with one of the guys that's a pickleball player on the tennis courts. He also happens to be a tennis player. But in any case, I hate to see any tennis courts go because there's only really 8 of them in Albany. And I don't see why we couldn't have both without putting dedicated tennis courts. And I know I didn't find out about this till yesterday. One of my tennis playing folks told me it was going to happen. I didn't know that you were talking about changing them. And I hate to see another tennis court go down because tennis does go up and down. And mainly you see many more kids playing tennis than you do pickleball. The average age is much higher for pickleball. That's all.
Thank you for your comment.
Pardon?
Thank you for the hand raise too.
My name is Herman Schweiker. I live in Albany. I've been here 6 years. And I've played pickleballs since about the first month I've been here. My wife and I wanted some activity. We used to play softball, but that was not available. I'm wearing a Concord shirt. Why? Because there was not enough opportunity to play pickleball in Albany. Okay, recently it's increased because Kathy, we got groups together on Sundays, but previous to that it was Tuesday nights and Thursday nights and then in the school. I want to play at least 3 times a week, if not 5, to stay healthy. I'm the 79-year-old. And I think in what Berkeley shows, when you have courts available all the time, people come all day long. I drive by the Berkeley courts. I see 4 people at 8 in the morning. Today, we played for 2 hours. There were 20 people there. I think there are probably 20 people there every day, Monday through Sunday, around 10 to 12. Pickleballers like to come together in groups, okay? If you have dedicated courts, you can do that. If you don't, you come, maybe, we used to wait for the tennis, if tennis is played on one court, it's almost impossible to play pickleball. Well, it is impossible to play more than one court. If you want to make 4 dedicated courts, you have to prevent the balls from going back and forth. Pickleballs are always rolling all over the place. We're used to it. But the tennis players would not like it if the pickleballs came over. So if you wanted to do a tennis court and 4 pickleball courts, you need a pretty high fence to keep the balls back and forth. It is dangerous if the ball, we know about it in pickleball. We're constantly, you hear ball, you know, you stop. So I would like the opportunity to play more pickleball here. I used to go to Walnut Creek. I got tired of driving, so I would like to have more pickleball courts here. I think they would be well used.
Thank you for your comment. Raise your hand.
Hello. I read through some of the comments, actually all of them. I got here early, and I noticed a trend. I played pickleball for 2 years. I played pickleball for 10 months. I played tennis for 30 years. My parents taught me. I'm teaching my daughter. It's a sport played multi-generational, from 4 all the way up to 80, 90. People, as our Albany tennis team, we play with people from all different walks of life. The 4 courts at Memorial, one of them is delaminating from tennis, so it's very hard to play on. You're taking away 2 other courts, which I would actually disagree. They are not in good shape. That's why people don't play tennis there. And I would actually say that the Cedar Rose courts were the same way. And I think it's fine for those to go to pickleball courts. Those were terrible tennis courts. They're situated the wrong way. They're completely wrong. They were just wrong light, wrong place. These are 2 tennis courts we just can't lose. There are way more tennis players, all multi-generational tennis players, all over the board, and it just seems very clear to me.
Thank you for your comment. Thank you for the hand raise.
Hi, my name's Chip Wasson. I've been living in the East Bay since 1984, going to Cal. I'm a born and bred tennis player. I grew up practicing 7 days a week, hitting a bag of serves, bag of forehands, bag of backhands, bag of overheads, and I played through my second year in the 18s. I stopped playing tennis after a while, and I came later in life upon pickleball, and I have been so compelled by what pickleball does for humanity. It's amazing what it does for old people, young people, middle-aged people, and the stoke of the people who are playing pickleball is so new. I used to be the person who was poo-pooing every other racket sport if it wasn't tennis. And pickleball owns a big place in my heart. I think another thing that we're missing here is that pickleball runs on a fast turnover. So in a place where you have a lot of people who want to play, the turnover is quick. They're 11-point games. 4 other people get on the court, or at least 2 other people get on the court if it's a challenge court. Whereas tennis, you're playing at least 1 set. You're warming up, then you're playing a set. You might be playing 2 out of 3. So for 2 people or 4 people on a tennis court, it takes up quite a bit of time. And, you know, we're talking about 8 people playing tennis versus 32 people playing pickleball at a high turnover rate. So another thing about Ocean View is the lights and the noise. There was a situation down in LA where people complained about the ball because it was near residences. This is one of the only locations that we have that is not near residences. So that's another big consideration. And these lights and having dedicated courts, really, I don't go to Ocean View anymore because of the courts at Cedar Rose. They're dedicated. You want to play on good courts. So I go there, but as soon as this comes, I'll be there all day long. My son Luke over there, who's 14, he's almost a professional player. I have a 22-year-old who professes that he will play pro pickleball. My daughter, who's 10, plays. My wife has never picked up a racket sport in her entire life. She is over the moon about pickleball. The fitness, everything. I mean, it's a no-brainer.
Thank you for your comment. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Hello, my name is Jack Wolf. I'm a longtime Albany resident, 20 years plus. I am going to be a pickleball coach, and I will be teaching kids at the Ocean View courts. And I'm currently also going to teach in El Cerrito at the Madera School. And there's a school in El Sobrante, the Olinda School. There's a woman that has a program that teaches tennis all over the state, and she actually lives in Texas. But she's adding pickleball programs because there's a demand for it. And I've seen since Cedar Rose has opened, a lot of young kids coming. And there are groups of kids that come right after school gets out. They come like 4 or 6 of them, and they'll play. I've seen 2 parents come with 2 kids, or 1 parent with 3 kids, sometimes, 2 of their own kids and a best friend or something like that. The kids I'm teaching will be 1st through 5th grade. So I think the fact that there haven't been a lot of dedicated courts around, so pickleball hasn't been that visible, is one of the reasons why we don't currently have huge numbers of kids playing. But I've talked with other coaches that are in this program that this woman runs, it's the Casser Sports Youth Tennis League, I think it's called. Anyway, some of them have said, it's hard to learn to play tennis, but kids can probably pick up pickleball quickly. And I've seen from handing out paddles and giving them a ball, letting them hit it a little bit, just how quickly kids take to it. So I just feel like it's not correct to say that kids don't play this, because we've had a generation of seniors get excited and people younger, but kids are coming. They're next. There'll be huge numbers of kids wanting to play. So.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Darlene. I've lived in the East Bay almost 30 years. I play pickleball as much as I can. I'm a coach of pickleball. I teach it at Cedar Rose Park. Just started doing it last Saturday from 12 to 2. I had 15 people show up, and we played for 2 hours. More people came. All the while we were there were 2 people playing tennis on an adjacent court, just to give you a comparison. I also teach it at the Berkeley Y, and I have taught grandparents and their children and their children. I've taught 3 generations at one time to play the game, and they can play together because it's so much easier to play than tennis. It's that stupid little wiffle ball, and it's a paddle. The court is very short, so little kids can easily play it. Yes, the boomers are the ones who are the biggest proponents right now, but we're bringing our kids along, and it's a fun game, easy to learn. It takes 15 minutes to play a game. And the social aspects are impeccable. I've met so many people who are retired who said, yeah, I retired, and I was pretty much just walking my dog and watching TV. Then I heard somebody play pickleball, and now that's all I do. So the fitness elements are amazing.
Thank you so much for your comment.
Hi, I'm Deborah Bernhardt, a resident of Albany for the past 22 years. One funny thing is that I have a daughter who's a landscape architect now. She's 23. And for the past 3-4 years, that's all I talk about. I play pickleball about 6 days a week. She's like, Mom, just stop it. Well, now she tells me, oh my God, the company I work for is building pickleball courts wherever we do projects. So she's like, I respect pickleball. My daughter is here. Came from work. She plays pickleball with our family. It's my husband and I, and our daughter. That's one great thing. It's changed my life in many ways. Another thing about tennis versus pickleball, I really truly want everybody to be happy in sports, truly. But I feel that there's 6, if we had 2 pickleball courts at Ocean View, which is truly underutilized, I see 2 tennis players there at any given time of the day. And I see 10 to 25 pickleball players there on weekends and most weekdays, from maybe 10 to 12 or 4 to 7. And I'm starting to see children, and I'm teaching kitchen ball, pickleball at the Albany Senior Center now to get more seniors out there. And I just think that it would be fair to leave the 6 courts in Albany and have 2 for pickleball, and have that beautiful redwood trees, the picnic area, the bocce ball, pickleball, kids, grandparents, and all of us happily playing pickleball. That's it.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Peter Hartzog, and I live across the creek in El Cerrito. I wanted to make 2 points. One is I was playing last week at Cedar Rose in the early evening, and a family, a father and 2 young children were playing on one court, and we were playing on another court. We needed a 4th person. I'm 72, had 2 other people who were probably in their 50s. And one of the kids came over. I said, "How old are you?" He said, "I'm 6.5." And we were able to have a regular pickleball game with that 6.5-year-old. So that just shows the versatility of this game and being able to get young kids involved. The other thing is I wanted to make sort of a hypothetical a case. If we flipped the multi-use case and said, suppose we had permanent pickleball courts, and the tennis players could bring in a portable tennis net and set that up, which they'd have to pay for and have their own lockbox and set up and take down and have the conflicting lines and so on. How many of the tennis players would do that versus just go up to Memorial or some other place because it's easier? It's much, much better to have permanent pickleball nets when you're playing. It's a much better experience. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comment.
Hello, my name is Peter Sullivan. I live in Orinda, but I've been an active member of the tennis community here in Albany for, 8, 9 years now. I don't want to debate about the relative merits of tennis and pickleball. That's not my expertise in any kind of way. What it seems like, though, is it's a question about facility usage. Right now, there's a thriving, positive community in tennis, thanks in large part to Morgan and his leadership. With his group lessons and teaching teens, and a very positive environment there. And it sounds like it's a very positive pickleball community as well. From the metrics of the pickleball presentation, I might have misread them, but it sounds like the pickleball community has done very well right now in the multi-usage environment over the last, is it 10 years that you guys been? So I don't understand why you'd want to exclude tennis players and have hurt that community versus they're both thriving now. Taking things away from the tennis community just seems a little bit unfair, how I see it. Both communities are working very well. Removing the tennis players, the ability to play there at the current location just seems unfair.
Thank you so much for your comment.
Hi, my name's Marshall Berzon. I've been a Kensington resident since 1974. I just wanted to say a couple of things. One is that winter's coming, okay? So in a couple of months, I play pickleball between 7 and 10 times a week. Starting in a couple of months, there will be no place, no lighted permanent pickleball courts anywhere in this area. There will continue to be lighted tennis courts even if we convert the Ocean View. But there will be no place to play pickleball after 4 o'clock in the afternoon that are dedicated courts anywhere in the Bay Area. I also wanted to just, as a personal note, I'm another one of those people who, since they retired a few years ago, spent 90% of their time sleeping and watching TV until about 1.5 years ago when I started playing pickleball. And it's important to understand that a lot of the people who play pickleball used to play tennis, and they don't anymore because they can't. Their bodies won't take it anymore, okay? They're too old, like me, okay? The difference that playing pickleball has made just in my life and in my health is absolutely extraordinary, and this just seems like something that we could do for potential pickleball players all over this area. So, thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Thank you for the hands.
Hi, my name is Terry Chen. I am an Albany homeowner and resident, and have been that way for 10 years. I've also used the Ocean View courts for tennis for those 10 years as well, although you won't see me there in the middle of the day because I have to work in San Francisco during the day. You might see me there at night. So 8 tennis courts in Albany. So I don't want to debate pickleball versus tennis either. But, you know, I know for tennis, right, 8 tennis courts in Albany might sound like an abundance, but there's definitely a strong community in Albany for tennis, for both kids and adults. I know several juniors coming out of Albany that have gone on to college on tennis scholarships. And for adults, in 2019 alone, we had 12 leagues coming out of Albany, 12 league teams. Ocean View is currently the only set of lit courts that I know of that you can reserve for instruction and clinics. I have a group of friends right there, and we've been doing a clinic at night for years. But due to overwhelming demand, we were recently told we can no longer reserve those 2 courts that we need at Albany Memorial Park. We have to do that at Ocean View. So if those courts go away, this clinic probably dies. What else? Oh yeah, so I've also been playing tennis for over 20 years. After a long hiatus, I restarted playing tennis again for the first time at the Ocean View courts. During that first session, there was this 12-year-old kid next to me hitting with his dad. That 12-year-old kid went on to graduate from Albany High, recently played tennis at Santa Clara, graduated, and is about to start a career in financial services. And he keeps talking to me about how much he wants to give back to the community here, largely due to tennis, which is awesome. So, as alluded to earlier by you all, right, the data is largely around reservations, but you only need 2 people to play tennis, so most of it, I think, is drop-in, although I don't have data to validate that. I do know that one of those drop-in folks is a good friend of mine who's also a homeowner that lives just south of Buchanan. She plays tennis with a husband there, walks over to have reprieve from taking care of her kid. If those courts didn't exist, she probably wouldn't do that, and she probably wouldn't even have any time with her husband. So that's all.
Thank you for your comment. For the hands.
Hi, my name's Bill Pounding. I live in Berkeley. To me, I agree with one of the previous speakers who advocated for tennis, that it's a facilities and numbers issue. And as Kathy pointed out, there are 8 courts now in Albany. There would end up being 6. There are multiple parks in the surrounding communities that have tennis courts, you know, dare I say, dedicated tennis courts, not, you know, because it's sort of, when you talk about pickleball, it's like, is it dedicated or is it, you know, lines on a court with a portable net? I was involved in advocating this for the city of Berkeley to build the Cedar Rose courts, and so I've played there quite a number of times. I ride my bike there on my way to BART frequently, and we're stunned by the number of people using those courts. If it's not 10 times as many people playing on that one former tennis court compared to the 2 resurfaced tennis courts that should be attracting tennis players because they're brand new in terms of the resurfacing. The numbers, just speak for themselves. As far as tennis, pickleball being a flash in the pan, I mean, maybe that will turn out to be the case in 10 years. I'd be very surprised. But in any case, every 10 years, courts need to be resurfaced. If it turns out that pickleball is the racquetball of, our generation, so it converts back to tennis. But I can't imagine that happening. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment, and thank you for the hands.
Hi, Issa, Albany resident. Again, I don't want to talk about the merits of pickleball versus tennis. I think one of the things that is at the heart of the issue is there room for both? Tennis players have seen tennis courts painted with pickleball lines. We've heard about how tennis lines interfere with the pickleball playing and it makes it confusing. Well, the opposite is also true, and that's okay, because we want to share the courts with people who want to use them, whether it's a pickleball league or kids in an after-school program who are not doing anything related to sports activities. I think the facilities should be shared in a way that lots of people, or as many people as possible, can use them. And if you turn courts into pickleball designated or only pickleball courts, you're excluding tennis players. However, as you can tell by the number of people who play pickleball 8 days a week, there's a lot of pickleball happening in the community. So while it might be a popular sport and more courts may be helpful for people to play more, we can see that there are a lot of people playing quite a bit of pickleball, which is a wonderful thing. Tennis happened to change my life. As a kid, I found tennis, and it turned me from someone with low self-esteem into someone who who grew confident through tennis and learned about life. I had a wonderful coach, and then I ended up playing tennis at the #1 Division II college in the country. I teach tennis part-time. I play tennis, and as anyone who has played tennis knows, it is something that can be played by people of all ages, and it sounds like pickleball is the same too. So in conclusion, I would like to say that a lot of the things that the proponents of pickleball have said about why pickleball should be there are from their perspective. I mean, you could put more ping pong courts on, ping pong tables on a pickleball court and say, oh, well, if we do that, then more people will be able to use the courts, but it's just from your own perspective and what you want to do. So thank you very much, and I hope that you'll consider having pickleball courts and tennis courts together. Thank you.
Thank you. And I do just want to say that in the interest of time, we're not going to be able to have people speak twice. But come ahead, if you haven't spoken already, you're welcome to come up. But I just want to mention that just because we want to have time for discussion. I certainly don't want to cut off any public comment from people that haven't spoken yet, but I just want to be mindful. Welcome.
Hi, my name is Bob Bernhardt, and long-term resident of Albany, about 21 years, I guess. And I'm not up here to, speak against tennis or against pickleball, because I play both. I consider tennis my primary sport. And the only thing I really want to say is that, and this is just anecdotal, okay? I do use the Ocean View courts. I think Ocean View has a great backboard. I love hitting on that backboard. Don't lose the backboard. If you do convert Ocean View to pickleball courts exclusively, I don't have a place to really go and just practice my serve, okay? Which is kind of selfish, but okay. And I was thinking about that, and I play on USTA teams out of El Cerrito, and between all the other courts around here, like Memorial Park, Harding Park, El Cerrito High School, Mosier, Terrace Park, Arlington Park, I don't have any problem finding a place to play tennis. And, and to the point about dedicated courts are just much preferable to temporary pickleball courts. Yes, yes, yes. I mean, it just is. It's just much more aesthetic. It's just much more desirable to have dedicated courts. As a tennis player, even though it's my primary sport, I play pickleball too, and I'm glad that I share that with my family, and I love the sport. But I really do support, turning Ocean View into a place just for pickleball.
Thank you for your comment. Sir?
My name's Morgan Shepard. I lived in Albany for 8 years. I now live in El Cerrito. I'm a tennis coach and tennis player. I've taught many of the youth and the adults and communities. And my main points here are there are just not enough tennis courts at prime times. The memorial courts are used by the high school, so if you go over there anytime before 6, you can't really get on those courts. And that's the majority of all the Albany courts. And then if you try to get there at night, they're almost always full because they're lit. And so the other 2 courts, which are lit, are kind of the only other courts that people can go to. And I think a lot of times those aren't used because people don't know necessarily. It's kind of hidden. It's there. And I think the vast majority of users aren't necessarily rental users. They're drop-in. So we don't really know the statistics on that, and where people would be going if they had, if they know and have full choice of what's going on. But I think the main key is that, especially at night, during the day, it's not as big of a factor because there are enough tennis courts primarily, other than the very prime times. But at night, it's really essential, I think, in the long term, that you keep those courts for tennis and allow instruction, because that's the way things grow and people become tennis players and connect over time. And I think there's a very, very vibrant tennis community here in Albany and El Cerrito that, if you look at the numbers between all the leagues and everything else, there are a lot of people playing tennis. So that's it. And I credit the pickleball. I've played. I love it. It's fun. What you're doing is awesome, and I just do more. Let's get some dedicated courts, somewhere. But that's don't take away the tennis.
Thank you for your comment and the hands.
Hi, my name's John Swindell. I live in Albany. I've been there since '98. I've been playing tennis for 40 years, and it changed my life. I met my wife in Bangkok, Thailand in 1986, and we've been married ever since. She was a tennis player, I was a tennis player. But now we both play pickleball 5 to 8 days a week. And I think most tennis players who don't appreciate pickleball haven't played it, because it is a great sport, and we love tennis, and we love tennis players, and we just want to have space for everybody to play. I know that in the last 6 years, I started playing pickleball in Albany in 2013. And since that time has passed, Albany's been able to paint lines permanently, while the city of Concord put in 14 dedicated courts, Foster City put in 6 dedicated courts, Alameda put in 4 dedicated courts, San Francisco just put in 6 dedicated courts. I mean, I can't rattle them all off, but that's where the people go to play. Walnut Creek's got 8 dedicated courts. That's where the people go. So they go outside of Albany. Anyway, more power to tennis, but super power to pickleball.
Thank you for your comments. Oh, do we have one more? Okay.
My name is Carl Chung. I've lived in Albany for 20 years, and I play tennis several times a week. And it's important to my family because my children all play tennis. One of them, they play USTA tennis, and one of them went to Dartmouth. She just graduated and played for the team at Dartmouth. And so I think tennis is is a very important for the development of my family and for myself. And I see a large community of tennis players. Both a lot of the old people playing in the mornings, and then the younger adults, playing, playing as groups together. So it's just hard for us to see the loss of tennis courts. I really actually excited by what I hear about pickleball, but it's hard for us as tennis players to see our courts being taken away.
Thank you for your comment. All right. So I think at this point, then, we'll bring this back to the commission for a discussion, and I want to open it up for discussion from commissioners about all that we have heard. I will just start by saying that I really echo the, I feel like it's very difficult. First of all, I want to thank everybody that sent in feedback. I have played tennis and pickleball, and I love both sports, and I definitely grew up playing tennis, and I never made a reservation. We always dropped in, and I feel just in the last few weeks, I'm taking a tennis class at Memorial Park, and every time I've been at the class in the evening, at least 4 groups of people have come for drop-in tennis and been turned away because the courts were full. And so what it occurred to me was just that I feel an important piece of information I don't have about the actual census of use. It's not in competition with pickleball in my mind. It's just a separate piece of data that would help me understand how we can wrap our arms more around that drop-in usage and what the actual real cost or loss is by making making a space that can only be used for one particular use versus shared. And I also really take note of the idea of having to use the word dedicated, because it does sort of set that, oh, well, tennis is the norm, and then if it's dedicated to this. So I appreciate that comment being raised tonight as well. I would just say that for me, that's an important piece of information that I feel that we could maybe gather more information around. And the only other thing I wanted to just say is, I think I'll leave it there. Ben, do you have questions?
I want to follow up on that. Is it possible to collect that kind of data?
I'm not sure. We'd have to get creative on that and see if we could figure out a way.
Counter or
yeah, to put some thought into that. I'm sure we can figure out something.
I'm sure that this has been a question that has come up in other communities, and there's been a desire and a need to have that kind of data. So I would wonder, how this data has been collected other places. Yeah, I mean, I guess I have a similar reaction. Normally, I don't like to punt making decisions on things to gather more data, but I felt similar to you, where we're presented with a situation where we may remove the ability to play tennis in this location, and we don't really have a great sense of whether or not what effect that space will have, what effect removing that space would have on the availability of courts for people who need them.
I just want to say one other thing, which is that I'm fully supportive of us having pickleball in Albany. I think we've been a leader in a lot of areas and progressive thinkers, and I go past the Cedar Rose. I watched them get built and resurfaced, and I knew exactly what they were doing when I started seeing them take those nets out, and I was like, I have been thrilled to see how many people are at those parks and at those courts, and I think there's a great need. But I feel like it's a big decision of taking something away to put that in, and I want to make sure that we've been thoughtful about any other options and also just really understand it. So,
yeah, I would agree with that too. I want to appreciate, because I know a lot of these comments have been like, oh, well, it's intergenerational, and I feel like actually, I appreciate that this is a sport for seniors because I feel like there's not that many, and we have so many facilities for youth, so that's not my concern. I mean, I feel like, and I love the numbers that you're showing already. I agree, it's a data thing. I mean, you'll hear later that the very robust outreach we did for this very contentious dog park issue, and so I feel like I don't want to short shrift this for a community that certainly exists in Albany, which is a tennis community, and I feel like, you know, we should, I do think we should weigh this more carefully and get more information. I don't know, and I know it's hard and I know it's difficult, but I do feel like it would be kind of, it would be a rushed process to.
Let me push. Go ahead. Oh yeah, I personally don't feel like we need more data there, and here's why. One is we've heard from Shelley that they had data or a sense that it was being underused. We've already heard that in the last several years, and so they've been scheduling other things. And she's told us what some of those things are because the courts are often empty. Most of us had an experience, a publicly noticed meeting at the tennis courts / pickleball courts at Ocean View courts a few days ago, and we heard today that it's really hard to get. You can't get on the Memorial Park tennis courts before 6 o'clock because the high school kids are using it. So you'd think, well, if there's a high demand for tennis, those people would all be coming to the Ocean View courts, but most of us were there, some of us were there before 6 o'clock, and there were no people playing tennis. And then we were there at 6 o'clock and from 6 to 7. This is just one anecdote, but it was a weekday when some people are saying it's the peak time and at Memorial, and nobody was coming over to Ocean View. There was.
I think we could very well see that. I could see us doing this search or doing this data if we, whatever way we might see it, and it comes right back down to this same result. So I'm not saying that I disagree, but I do think it was just one point in time. I don't think we can, we were there for an hour. I don't think we can say after just 1 hour, that's the conclusion.
Sure. So it directly addresses what some people said about the courts at Memorial being unavailable. And but also we have what the Parks and Rec department, Shelley's group has told us that it's underutilized already. So I personally don't feel like we need to have some kind of a study that we're not sure how it would even be done.
Go ahead.
So it seems like both communities are intergenerational. I played tennis all growing up. I played in high school. I really love the sport. We just learned how to play pickleball. I have pickleball fanatics in my family. They don't live nearby, but I told them about this, and they told me they'd come visit if we had courts. So I understand, I feel like, both sides. I was really interested in Ben's potential proposition of like splitting the courts and having maybe 4 pickleball courts and a tennis court. I don't know about our facilities at Terrace, but I'm curious if, is there a way to spread the pickleball out more? I know it's not as ideal for tournaments, but if we're wanting to embrace both sports, maybe there's a way not to have everything in one location and have them more spread out so people can access them. So that's just one thought. So I guess I'm feeling like the options that were listed in our agenda are maybe not as comprehensive as if we thought it through. That said, I think that I also agree, and I think that we should figure out a way to have some dedicated pickleball sports, whether it's some at Ocean View and then we expand to the full thing, or figure out other options. I think that given the history of the sport, its status now, the enthusiasm, I think there's a way to find a space for pickleball in Albany.
I would add that I was, as far as pickleball, I thought it was a persuasive argument that because some of the emails for tennis, it said, well, this could be a flash in the pan, like whatever that other sport was that they were saying. And I mean, it seems like pickleball has a lot of momentum. I'd never heard about it until a year ago, but I've been impressed with the community and the enthusiasm and the numbers, the sheer numbers. And that in a few years, 10 years or whatever, the courts often get resurfaced anyway. It's not that expensive to do that, and if that it's not necessarily a permanent, it could be revisited if it was converted to 8 pickleball courts, could be revisited at a later time and resurfaced for not that much money, maybe 10 years down the road.
Actually, I don't know if you're going to answer that, but
I was just going to say that you're please don't feel limited to the 3 options. It's completely up to you, what you guys are interested in moving forward or not moving forward, or any creative thing in between.
I have a question that somebody raised about reserving the tennis courts a memorial for instruction. Can you tell us more about that, those limitations?
Yeah, that has actually been in our master fee schedule since 2010, and I think we've been a little lax in enforcing it. This is for private instructors who are being paid for instruction, so basically making money off of city property, and we had designated Ocean View as the site for private instruction. Because it had a little more availability, we could track when the instructors are actually out teaching and make sure they're staying within the permit that they've required from us. They pay a slightly higher fee to use the courts for that, and they should be providing us with proof of insurance and get a business license, because that's in essence what they do. You'll find in some other cities, Berkeley doesn't even allow people to rent their facilities for I think they call it personal gain or whatever, in terms of making money. So we try to keep them in one location. Now, if the courts obviously are not tennis courts anymore and instruction needs to move, then we'll make adjustments to that. And that master fee schedule is revisited every year by the council, so it's not set in stone.
I see. Okay.
What was the question about resurfacing? Are there plans?
No, it was just the comment was made that Memorial Park doesn't allow private tennis instruction.
Okay.
So you can't reserve it. So the limitations, if you don't have Ocean View available, then where can you do that private instruction?
It was also driven by the fact that Memorial is very popular, and so we wanted to keep those people on a court that wasn't as used as much. And you'll notice in there that the private instruction is actually noted on the Memorial Park time, and it's about 7% of that time. So we have people looking for places to play and things. There might be a private instructor teaching and using it as a business rather than letting residents use it for drop-in. So,
But to what Todd said, when are the memorial courts slated for resurfacing? And is that something that, because there's such heavy use from the high school, that they also contribute to financially?
That's a good question. We did resurface the back 2 courts, or the upper courts, and I think that was in 2015. Now, we used a system for resurfacing that many people did not like, but it was supposed to be a more modern system that would allow us, because there are some really large trees in that area, and when we had to resurface them, it's because we had huge roots that were growing into the court. So the new system allowed you to be able to cut out these sections, or also be more flexible. So when there's a little lift, it didn't just crack an entire section of it. The comments that we've received after that resurfacing is that it plays differently than a typical court, plays a little slower. But then there's some people that like that because they play a little slower. But that's why you're getting comments. It does feel different than the other 2 courts. I'd have to look back and see what the typical schedule has been for resurfacing. I haven't had any complaints necessarily about Memorial or Ocean View that there is something drastically wrong. We did a little repair at Terrace, I think, in 2018. Those kind of things come up once in a while.
Is the tree that's slated to be removed the one whose root? No, okay. And then we heard some comments about the backstop being popular at Ocean View. Whatever that wall's called. Is that something that could be something like that erected at the other courts?
We'd have to think about it. It's more of like a space situation. That hitting wall is fairly used. It is popular with the Friendship Club kids, and when they were at Memorial, they wanted a wall over there as well. So that could be something that's looked at if it was a need.
One of the comments we heard from a tennis player is that a big concern is nighttime availability of courts. And is it at all realistic for lights to be installed at Terrace Park, or should we just completely put that off the table as a possibility?
You guys like to take on tough topics, don't
It's surrounded by houses.
Yes. Okay, I'll say that it was definitely surrounded by houses, very close. The proximity to those courts. Those courts are right in the middle between houses on this side and houses on that side. I mean, there are more modern lights that restrict and direct and LE versions that are better than these kind of wide, broad, old-fashioned lights that we have probably at Ocean View that need to be replaced. But I think you would have a large opposition to that.
Yeah, I think would never happen. And as much as I want to think of creative solutions that can make everybody okay with the ultimate decision, unfortunately, I think that's off the table.
One thing I did just want to comment on that I picked up in all the letters and as well in some of the comments is, and that I really appreciate about what people are sharing, is that there's a real social aspect to this sport because of how quickly the games turn, because of the waiting time. Also, people mentioned in the letters that because you know that there's going to be a lot of turnover, you can just kind of show up and be pretty well assured you're going to rotate in if you have multiple courts happening, and then that critical mass tends to draw more people. So I think all of that to me also speaks to a sort of lessened benefit of dividing up the courts like into multiple locations, because you lose some of that, oh, everyone's just going to be there. It gives you the social element, and it also gives you that assuredness that you'll be able to just rotate and get into a game. And I think honestly one of the challenges of tennis is that you have to get into some kind of group to be in some round robin or to be able to just show up by yourself to play. It's not as easy to do that. And so I think that's a benefit of this sport, but it's also something that maybe would limit the feasibility or the sort of additional benefits of sort of dividing out a couple courts here, a couple courts there, because you lose that the group aspect that makes it work well at like Cedar Rose Park, for example.
I agree with that, and I would also echo your praise of all the people who commented in emails and in person. I feel like I've learned a lot about what is important to the various communities. There are some topics that come before us where we're sometimes wishing that people from the community could come out and inform us as to what impact a decision would have on them, and they're not there. So I really feel like we've gotten a lot of 360-degree view of what's going on and how to inform our decision.
Just talking, if we can sort of explore, if it makes sense, the different options. And to me, it seems like.
Let me say so. I haven't had a chance to say anything. I'm uncomfortable with the way we're framing this as a zero-sum proposition. I mean, Albany is a very resource-constrained environment. We deal with this all the time. We dealt with this in the dog park discussion. You're going to deal with it with the garden discussion. I really have we're supposed to say compromise is part of what we do because we're trying to get the most use out of these different resources we have, these very limited resources. I would love to be able to just say like Concord or San Francisco or Walnut Creek, say, here's some space, we're going to put in some new courts. We don't have that luxury. Although that area by the freeway,
I was thinking of that
the real potential for, I don't know what it costs. It costs a lot more to put something new in than to resurface, I know, but you have a whole complex there. So I want to be careful when we start thinking about this as it's got to be this or this. I really want to get as much out of this as we can, is what I'm saying.
Well, I would say we've already been doing that. The city's already been doing that with the stripes on the tennis courts.
Sure.
So the city's already been doing that, and now there's a request to doing something else.
Well, I would agree with Todd, though. I think this is what our commission is for, to explore these areas and to hear from the public and to consider compromises. So I just would support that wholeheartedly, is for us to feel that we can have a discussion and not feel like we have to do what's presented before us. And I think Shelley's also encouraging us to have that discussion, so. Yeah.
And I would just add that in my opening comment about the data, it's not that I want to sort of put off something interminably, but I just want to feel like I'm as informed as I can be, because my heart is with each of these communities, and I do think it's not pie. It's not like you're not going to get this and I'm going to get that. But how can we really meet the needs of a diverse community and also think about long-term impact of those decisions? And so I think what I've realized is that would help me a little bit, but I also appreciate we can't study the heck out of this. So my feeling is just that it would be nice to have a little more time to maybe gather a little more information, and that would help me feel more comfortable, because some of the things we're talking about are permanent decisions, and that's a lot different than sort of something that will be a usage arrangement where it can go back and forth.
So Shelley, in the parks and recreation profession, is there a standard of service for the number of tennis courts that should be in certain types of communities?
I'd have to look. I'm not sure. Dan, have you had any projects with courts?
I think there are recommendations, but every community is different because every community has different resources and different availabilities. So it's a tough question to answer.
And we've also seen the numbers in the presentation that showed in the region, in the three cities, the two cities bordering us plus Albany, the number of courts and for one use or another.
So I've really gone back and forth on this issue. I actually have a list that I put together of the reasons to vote in favor of creating dedicated pickleball courts at Ocean View. I think, you know, part of my concern with that goes to what you were saying, Todd, about we're a land-constrained community, and we need to make the best use of what we have available. And in a lot of ways, multi-use of a space by more than one activity is the more efficient use of that space. And so I think the question really is the public interest best served by removing a multi-use of that space and making it dedicated to one use? And I don't know. I could be convinced that it is. You know, I was looking at, you know, because I am a city planner, I was looking at projections for population in Albany. And it's pretty interesting. It's sort of what you would expect, that the baby boomer cohort is aging, and over the next 20 years, there's going to be a dramatic increase in the number of seniors age 65 and over. There's actually going to be a decrease in every other age cohort in Albany. And so I think it is really, really important that the parks and recreation facilities in Albany are meeting the needs of the senior population. And I think we've heard tonight, and we've read in the correspondence, that pickleball is something that is really serving that population and will continue to serve that population and will serve them even more, and they will be served even more in the future. I think that's really important for us to consider. I think there's a lot of policies within the general plan that call for the city to meet the diverse needs of the community, including the needs of the senior citizens. And so I think that's really important. I think it's really important for us to think about, you know, what are the recreation needs of the community now and in the future, and are we adequately meeting them? And dedicated pickleball courts that can't be used for anything else, maybe that is the best use of that space. Alternatively, you could argue that, you know, given the popularity of tennis and the fact that it's currently a tennis court and can be used by both pickleball and tennis, that's the better use of that space for now. I'm not sure, and I think that's part of the reason why I was feeling like a little more data, as much as I hate to say that, could be useful if that data was readily available. You know, I'm a tennis player. I play tennis with my kids, and I have a lot of experience of going to Memorial Park and not being able to play there because it's being used by the schools or it's just busy. And so I guess from that personal sort of anecdotal experience, it makes me a little nervous about removing the ability to play tennis at Ocean View, just because I have the personal experience of the courts not being available when I want to use them.
So one question I would have for you is, when they weren't available at Memorial, did you immediately go to Ocean View?
I didn't even know Ocean View existed until recently.
Okay.
So maybe, you know, maybe what we can learn more is that the problem isn't so much the lack of availability of the courts. The problem is more a lack of knowledge that the courts.
So the city could, for the next year, decide to promote tennis at Ocean View Park. Maybe that's what we want to do. That's not, I don't see that as being the answer to this. We've heard the city tell us that the court is underused. They've been scheduling all kinds of other things there because the court was underused. If this body decides that what we really need to do is keep the striping the way it is and just advertise tennis more, I wouldn't agree with that. If the decision is that we need more compromises everywhere, then maybe what we need to do is double stripe all the courts in Albany, fund lock boxes for the pickleball nets, and then everything is a dual use. Right now, everything but Ocean View is dedicated tennis, and we've heard from many different ways the popularity and the benefits of pickleball. So my personal opinion is that, as Ben was saying, maybe the optimal use, well, he was saying all kinds of things, but maybe the optimal use is 8 dedicated pickleball courts. And like I've said, I don't feel like we need more data. I don't know how we would get data on drop-in use. There's been a suggestion of cameras. There's been a suggestion of having people sit there and with clickers or something. I don't know. So I don't see that going anywhere. As much as we'd like perfect data, I think we have really good data, actually. And I think we can move forward with it.
I just want to add one other comment. This is related to my experience going past the Cedar Rose tennis courts actually regularly, which is that they post the times that city instruction is going to be happening on the courts, so that when people are drop-in tennis users, they can see that and know, oh, don't come on Saturday mornings at 9 or at 11 because that's when the city does classes. I noted that at Memorial we don't have that, and I think because there's so much instruction and group use, it might be helpful to just post up there when there are classes or things that are set every week or whatever, just because it would help those families where, like, I felt for, dads with their kids and they're all dressed and they got their rackets and they're coming after work, and then it's like, oh, if I'd have known that there were classes in all 4 courts, like, I wouldn't have come here. So that's just an aside about how to maybe navigate that. Some of the people are using it drop in, but I think it's a good practice because of a limited resource.
I mean, I still am a little bit troubled by, like, it's either all or nothing. I guess I feel like I'd like to explore. I mean, honestly, I do think having dedicated pickleball courts is a real value, and I totally see that. I don't think the lock boxes would ever be, like, a great solution. But I do think there is potential room for compromise. I mean, I was thinking, I'm just going to throw this out there because we're not going there, and I just want to say this. If we could do half tennis, half 4 pickleball courts. I know it wouldn't be perfect for tournaments, but we have to compromise sometimes. But those 4 pickleball courts, I totally see the value of seating, absolutely. And I actually think that's a huge value. And I actually think that sometimes if you have to wait, you actually have this opportunity to socialize. So if there's 3, so if the other half of the court for pickleball were 3 the nets, permanent nets, and then 1 that was flexible, and that could be the seating space, because I see that seating space as being critical for social, but still, at least you still get 3 pickleball courts, and it's a fast turnover. I just wanted to explore that. The other thing, and I heard the complaint about, like, tennis balls hitting into the, and I think that there's solutions for that too. Like, there's a net you could put in between. I'm just thinking in terms of, like, if I had to make an immediate decision right now, I would be very uncomfortable with full pickleball, but I would be more comfortable with something like half the courts being pickleball and half the courts being tennis.
What I would say for that partly is it sounds like it wouldn't make, half wouldn't make tournaments more difficult, it would make them impossible. So, and then also if there's 8, they were proposing that often the 8th space wouldn't have, the 8th space wouldn't have a permanent net. So like what you're describing for 4, and then it'd be a hangout spot.
Perhaps if they were to have a tournament, they could set up, like, temporary, additional pickleball courts like they do in other places like El Cerrito, right? Like, it's not completely limiting it, it's just making it slightly harder.
I'd like to look a little further into pushing the fence back. You mentioned, I mean, there is quite a bit of room there. You mentioned by the, I guess, the east gate. I know there's room there. I know we warm up there for softball, things like that. You might be able to put room there for seating.
Is that the part that's abuts the school? Because
No, it's the part along next to the baseball field.
There's a little part we own over there too, but
I
that
don't
was
know
for the
what that
garden when we were
is.
looking at that. But okay, so that's
Yeah,
helpful.
yeah.
So I'm not sure how best to proceed with this group, and I see the time, and I also see a lot of eager faces in the audience. What I want to know is, are we comfortable? Yeah. Do we have a motion that we can at least vote on, or do we? Yeah. What would people like to do in terms of proceeding forward?
I think somebody should make a motion and see if it passes.
Okay, I move to make the Ocean View Park 8 dedicated pickleball courts.
Okay. Can I ask one clarifying question before? Well,
Let's have discussion.
Yeah.
If we get a second, we can have discussion.
Okay. Is there a second?
Not
We
at
can't get a second? We don't have that. So I'm going to make a different motion, which is to consider approving some adjustment to the Ocean View tennis courts for between 4 to 8 pickleball courts to see, pending more usage data, whether I guess I'm really proposing 1 court only is really what that would be. Is there a second for that?
You're proposing making one
court.
dedicated, 2 or 4 dedicated pickleball
Out of 1.
courts and then 1 tennis court.
Provided that there's enough space to adequately do that. And I don't know that there is in terms of the design. So that would be pending review of further things. That's one motion. I don't know.
Second.
Okay, is anyone all in favor of that?
Can you restate your motion, please?
Motion would be to take one of the tennis courts at Ocean View and convert it to 4 pickleball courts and leave 1 as a tennis court, pending that there be adequate design that could make that playable for both sports simultaneously.
Including a fence between them and.
Something between them, separating them, and also finding some kind of seating area to make the 4 courts serviceable.
It's a lot of ifs.
Can I amend that
Yes,
motion?
feel free.
Is that the proper
Yeah.
procedure? I would amend it to say to direct staff to study the feasibility of doing 4 pickleball courts and 1 tennis court and seeing if that works, and if so, letting us know so that we can approve that.
Okay, go ahead.
I just want to, we're not making a decision, we're recommending to council, correct? Or is this something that we have?
If you're going to convert it officially, then it's a recommendation, and then the funding would have to be approved, so it would end up going to council.
anything that- okay.
But further study, or directing staff for further study is,
Okay,
yeah.
very good.
So with the motion I made with that amendment that Ben offered, do we have a second for that? Or is your second still stand in that case? Hillary?
Further study? Does it require further study?
The part that's brought up is you want to check and make sure that there's adequate space. If you put 4 pickleball courts on 1 tennis court, that the amount of space between those 2 tennis courts allows for still tennis play on the tennis side and pickleball play
Do you
on the
have
other side.
regulation barrier space outside of the line?
Yeah, the outside of the courts is usually a standard amount of space that allows a person to hit a ball that's coming off the court, so we just want to check
Or
that.
Shelley, do you know the answer to that question right now?
Do I wish I did. I do not know what the standard regulation size for that court. If you had a single court with just a fence around it, the amount of space that's required. But I know right now at Ocean View, the amount of space between the sidelines is, I think it's at 15 feet, and on the baselines, I believe, is at 20 feet. And so,
I'm sorry, does it need to be regulation? I mean, if it's a recreational use, is there some flexibility in the dimensions as well?
I think that's a good question. Yeah, I would have to. Hence the recommendation for, I guess, the feasibility of.
Okay, so then, yes, I would be comfortable seconding a motion that we,
Yeah, I mean, another way to say it is to move forward with the 4 and 4 option, provided that there's sufficient space.
4 and 1, you mean?
4 and 1.
Tennis, 4, yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, so we have a motion for that, pending that the staff look at whether there's adequate space and all of that.
I'm just going to say I'm not prepared. I think there's more options we can look at. I'm going to be a no. I'm just letting you know. I'm not because I think it's a bad idea, but just because I think there's more stuff. I feel a little rushed. I think there's more we can look at.
So we have a second. I think we should go ahead and have a vote, and it's fine if it doesn't pass. But all those in favor say aye. Okay. So we're not in an actionable space.
How many?
Hillary and I said yes, and the others, all those opposed? Abstentions? Okay. So we're back to the point of how about we,
Well, how about we double stripe every tennis court in Albany and put lock boxes out and go from there. So it's the ultimate in shared space.
Is that a
are you
motion?
making a motion?
I move to do that. I don't want to do that. I want to do the 8 dedicated ones, but that's a motion.
Do we have a second on that? Okay, so that didn't have a second.
I don't know that, but I just want to make sure that we understand, like, what I'm hearing from Todd is he wants to explore this a little more. I heard from Ben, Hilly, we want to explore it a little more. So I don't think it has to be like, oh, we're not going to do it. And this is a conversation. And and so I don't think we need to move to do like nothing. I don't think the conclusion of this night is nothing, right? So I just want to say, I really appreciate all the comments here. I felt like it has been rushed. This is the first time we've really dug into this issue. So I don't think it hurts for something that's going to be a long, $50,000 potential project that's going to last at least a decade for us to consider it for 2 meetings. I don't think that's
I agree 100%, and I appreciate your stating that. And I think there have been many other issues where we, waited over one meeting, we got more information, and it just made the decision so much clearer. So I will say that I think we've explored the options that sort of were close in mind. My recommendation, and I don't know if I need to state this as a motion, but my recommendation would be at this point that we consult with staff, direct staff to maybe look at some other alternatives, or if there are alternatives that the commissioners have that we want to ask staff to help us explore, that's fine as well.
I mean, even I personally, in terms of engagement, I think it would be if there's a way to do some really quick online survey just to get some general public, because I think people just don't even know that this is happening. I mean, I could even tell from tonight from like our bocce ball conversation, be like, what? I didn't even know the bocce ball court. So I just feel like why don't we just put it out there a little bit more? And it's a great way to promote both sports. I just feel like there's a way for such a big decision like this. It will materially affect a lot of people. Can we just engage the public a little bit more?
I would agree with that. I feel like the demographic that was collected was a demographic of people who reserve courts online, and there are anecdotal reports of courts being busy or courts not being busy, and if there was just a way to get a little bit more information about those folks that perhaps are not reserving, that are just showing up, or their pickup matches, and I think I would feel much more comfortable making a decision with a little bit more information about that.
Do we need to create a pickleball subcommittee, like to help design that stuff? I mean, I guess
That seems too painful. I don't know.
I think, well, what I'm hearing is that there's an interest in understanding more about the drop-in usage, which is something we could maybe strategize around. And there's an interest in hearing from general members of the public who may or may not be affiliated with some of the groups that have come out in full force through the communications. And I do think we have heard from a lot of members of the public, which is also really great.
Right.
But I think what you're speaking to is just in a broader community-wide that might help us understand those people who are not reserving, and so they're kind of flying under the radar.
Yeah, and I mean, it doesn't have to be like a camera, like huge, like process of ding, ding, ding. It could be just like online survey. Have you ever gone to Ocean View tennis courts? How often do you, that kind of, I don't know how good that data is going to be, but at least just, I know. We got 200 dog park responses, right?
Because we posted where the dogs are.
Well,
I guess posted where the tennis court.
Well, we also posted online the city newsletter. I just feel like we should at least attempt to collect the data, even if it comes up nil. I don't know.
Yeah, I would maybe ask staff to talk to some of their colleagues and to see if they've collected this type of information in some way that we could maybe as well, just to make a little extra effort, just to see if we could have some more data on that drop-in usage. I think would make us all feel a lot more comfortable about this decision. And also, I think to give some more specific direction for what it seems like we're doing is maybe to look more closely at the 4-on-1 split option to see if that's going to work for that space. It's also going to give an opportunity for our various stakeholders to think about that idea as well and see what they think about it. You know, I would just love for there to be a way for us to provide 8 dedicated pickleball courts and not lose a tennis court. You know, there's a parking lot in Ocean View Park, and, you know, maybe that could be converted to some sort of other use. But, you know, I guess what I would ask staff is to really, you know, just make sure that there isn't any other possible way to do this and not lose a tennis court.
Well, and what I would say is if we do wait till a future meeting, that it's possible that we need a totally different proposal that hasn't been presented to us, but it could also be that people find that piece of information they needed to agree to some of the ones we've already been considering.
Agreed. I will say, I don't know if the freeway thing is just a pipe dream, but that is something that had occurred to me was, you know, in Connecticut, and of course it's snowy there, but they have an indoor pickleball center that's got dedicated courts, and I personally like to play sports outside, so I can appreciate the fresh air and all of that, but I wondered if that was at all ridiculous or, you know, whether there's any possible usage there. So it sounds like what we're going to do is sort of move on from this item today with sort of Shelley. Do you need a person from the commission to sort of be a partner to you as you're gathering the information, or not really?
If someone wants to be, I saw all the faces were like, oh, nobody wants to. But that's fine too. I can dig around, I can investigate and find what I can find. I'll ask around some other cities and see if we can find some data, or we'll get creative in this drop-in use and look at an online survey. I wanted to check with Commissioner Abbott to make sure that you didn't give me direction, but you really wanted some more study. Did you have anything else you wanted me to look at?
Just, I would be interested in just any information on expanding that space, moving the fence back one place or another. Seating, yeah, to open up. So, I mean, even if we converted it to the 8 courts, they were talking about leaving one flexible for seating. Well, if we could just expand it, then they could have 8, you know, just.
So more space for the seating part of it, okay.
Well, just, yeah, expanding that space a little bit. How far into that walkway between the dugout and the bleachers and the tennis court could we comfortably go? I know there's a light post that's, what, 2 feet out of it. I'm not sure it'd be enough, but.
Yeah, well, if we're going to have, it sounds like the resurfacing was about $50,000 was the quote or something. I think if we're asking for other scenarios like moving fences and taking over and having some sort of cost estimate for that would be good. If we're going to build an indoor facility like what was proposed, or a brand new facility somewhere else in town under the freeway, how much does it cost to build an entirely new court?
That's a lot to ask. I don't think we need all that information.
Maybe not get it in October, but. Yeah. But I can definitely dig in on the.
I don't need that information, but all these ideas are being tossed around without dollar figures on them. If people are serious about pursuing them, then we do need dollar figures. If people aren't serious about pursuing them, then I think we shouldn't ask staff to pursue them.
Right. I want to thank everyone for your attendance and your comments, and everybody for the conversation. I think at this point we're going to move to the final item on our agenda, unless it's too late and we need to, but I think it's a relatively short item, or? Yes. The dog park report, because it has gone to the council and we have some direction from council. So I'm going to turn it over to.
Yeah, anybody can speak to it, but what I wanted to say is that the presentation that the subcommittee did for council was fantastic, and the comments that they had and continue to talk about is how thorough that process was, how much you guys put time into that and made sure that people felt heard, and that you have ruined it for every other subcommittee that goes before the council because they want every report to be 120 pages of data. But they just got, every council person was impressed with your work, so thank you for all of your time and efforts to that. You say the rest of that.
So I can say that after all that work, council did approve our proposals. There was two parts of it. They are designating Memorial Park a dog park, and that opens up some possibilities for amenities. And we've been tasked, I believe, with coming back with what that would be, a plan for Memorial Park as a dog park. And they've all... I'm sorry, Memorial, Section B. No, the whole park. They generalized the whole park. No, Section B, Section Park.
Including the tennis courts, yeah.
Oddly, they're going to leave pickleball nets out anyway. I don't know. But and then additionally, they did leave it open that we can try to identify another location for a dog park. Is that everything?
Yeah, only that there was a consideration of having the fence be opened up by one of the council members, but I think we should get back to them with sort of analysis on whether or not that's a feasible option.
He liked the idea of it just being open, and that people should have better control of their dogs if they go to the dog park, and there would be no fence. A lot of the neighbors are concerned about the aesthetics and didn't like the fence. So
I think at one point in a previous meeting, there was a conversation about potentially, if it became a dog park, lowering the fence or having a different kind of fencing. But I know that...
the one neighbor that spoke was very opposed to it because the concern is in the violation of the hours. So
people hop over.
Yeah, and that was like at the end of the discussion, so we couldn't really come back in to interject. So it's okay. I think we'll do the plan that we present to them and then let them know.
And Madam Chair, are we going to ask for public comment on this?
Thank you so much for that reminder. Do we have anyone that wanted to make a public comment on the dog park?
Okay.
I wasn't planning, but...
But since you're here.
Yeah. So I'm Brian Young. I'm at 601 Carmel. And I'm okay with what's happened, especially some of what I understand, commitments from the dog subcommittee about moving the gate. I think that's an important aspect. And also maintaining the turf. Because I think aesthetically, moving the gate it's the single best thing you can do to reduce the noise to the neighborhood. And just to reiterate, please don't change the surface because the turf is very important. So thank you.
Thank you so much for your comment and for being here.
I wanted to add briefly, the other parts of the resolution included work that we'll be doing as a body, develop a detailed plan for minor improvements to the area, including installation of benches, improved signage, perimeter plants, trees, relocation of the park entry, in addition of a double gate. Also, we're charged with exploring possibilities for an additional location for a dog park in Albany. So that's something else that's part of our work plan. And then the fence
the fence
options, do we keep it the same or do we do something else with it?
What is the time frame on which you hope to kind of start to explore these things?
Like, aren't we over? Is it over yet? So I don't know. That's a question. Actually,
we mentioned we thought we were done.
Yeah,
we mentioned that. We thought we were done.
So Shelley, I don't know what the next step would be, right?
The gate part is kind of an easy thing. We know where that's going to go, so we can start looking at that as a big piece because that makes a difference. And so we can start kind of looking at that, getting some measurements, kind of meet with somebody that's, like fencing person, and we'll start to look at types of double gate.
And the park will be closed in a couple months, maybe over that period.
That's true.
Can be done. A good time
Correct.
to plant trees, for instance.
Yes, we can talk to John about that for the trees. It would be the placement of trees, which you guys can discuss.
So Julie really needs to get started on this and get this plan worked out.
Well, and so one question is, my understanding is that subcommittees shouldn't be standing subcommittees, and so are these the kind of things that can go to our, I think part of the question was, are these the kind of things that would go to our full body, or do we need do we still need a dog park subcommittee to chew on these things and make presentations to the full body?
I mean, that would be great. I know that was a big pull for that committee, and I don't know if other people want to get in on this part of it, or if you just want to start bringing back pieces of it, and it can be discussed in the larger group.
Well, what's interesting is I think one of the suggestions or recommendations we had is develop a detailed plan, but then we came to them with those specific things, and they said, yeah, do that. So in a way, I don't know what that means in terms of having to develop a plan for them to approve. It sounds like they just want to have it make it so, with the exception of giving them more information about opening up the fence. So given that, do we still have to, what kind of, I mean, obviously, we still want to come back to the public with like, this is where the bench would be, or, right? So.
Right, I think so. I think definitely in one of our meetings, let's have that larger discussion so that people have input to those. But like the mechanical things of fences and electrical things, and I think we have a general direction from council to look into that further and get some estimates on that, yeah.
Great. Okay, thanks.
Wonderful. I just want to also commend you guys again for doing such a phenomenal job. So I know many dog owners will be very excited for that space and the improvements that will make it more usable. And I think I just want to do a quick reminder that we have a creek walk and tour with Susan Schwartz for those that can join it on Friday, September 20th at 4 p.m. And it's also going to be noticed as a public meeting because it's going to be potentially more than a handful of us. And if you can't make it, I know Susan's happy to do that with people another time as well.
And that's meeting at Pablo and
we'll send out the information because I can't remember.
Belmont Village, basically.
Yeah, I think so, to walk along it with her. And she's going to share what they've done and what's happening. And and you're welcome to extend an invitation to somebody. I've invited a family member of mine who's interested in environmental things. And I think with that, I want to thank you all for your service this evening. And I know it was a lot of emails and a lot of comments and a lot of preparation. So thanks, everybody, and have a good evening.